Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Martin.
And I am Chief Patrick Danvers.
And Patrick, this is a rare treat because we are once again, for a rare time on this show, diving into a television series. Have we only done one before? Stranger Things, right?
I think it's only been Stranger Things, yeah.
We've only done Stranger Things, but you and I are huge fans. Well, I would say I go beyond huge. I would say I was an obsessed fan of True Detective Season 1.
Yeah.
I did watch Seasons 2 and 3, but I was obsessed with Season 1. So when True Detective Night Country was coming out, we kind of contemplated it and said, listen, this teeters on the line of horror, and I actually think, I would argue the new season's probably more horror-tinged than any other season, honestly, especially when you deal with some of the supernatural and ghosts and different things that happen in this season. And so we are going to tackle this week True Detective Night Country.
Yes, Damon, True Detective Night Country released in January of 2024 on HBO and HBO Max, starring Jodie Foster as Chief Liz Danvers, Kaylee Reese as Trooper Evangeline Navarro, Fiona Shaw as Rose Agenou, Finn Bennett as Officer Peter Pryor, Isabella Star-LeBlanc as Leah Danvers, Christopher Eccleston as Captain Ted Connolly, and John Hawkes as Captain Hank Pryor. And as you said in the intro, Damon, written and directed by Issa Lopez. And if you listen to this podcast and you love horror and you have not seen Tigers Are Afraid, which is written and directed by Issa Lopez, one of the truly most phenomenal films of the last 25 years, Damon, and I don't think that's hyperbole. It's a truly amazing film. And when I heard that a new season of True Detective is coming, of course I was excited because, like you, I was obsessed with the first season. And I did watch seasons 2 and 3, and I actually didn't hate them the way other people seem to. So I was all up for a season 4. And when I heard Issa Lopez, the director of one of the best movies I've seen in 25 years, is coming on to direct this entire season, to write this entire season, much like in the very first season. Nick Pizzolatto was the director, and the writer, and Cary Fukunaga was the director. I was ready again for sort of that singular vision. And Damon, you're right. The reason we're reviewing Night Country here on Rewind of the Living Dead is because I think this is indeed the most horror tinged of all the True Detective anthologies. And I mean, we might as well start there, Damon, with Issa Lopez at the helm, with this this idea for a True Detective. I mean, I think I had more scares in this season than all the other seasons combined, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Damon, the first season, as much as I love it, is as a suspense thriller, and a great one. But it wasn't always horror. It sort of had like glints of it. This is a horror season.
I would disagree slightly with the first season. I think the first season is definitely a horror season. I would say seasons 2 and 3 were not. Season 1 was definitely, because again, I think you get to the nature of the crime in season 1, which was that occult murder, and you're dealing with a cult of criminals. And when you really get into the investigation of it all, I think True Detective Season 1 was absolutely a horror season. Now, I do believe that Night Country is more horror-tinged than Season 1, but I would definitely argue Season 1 is. Also, real quick, I just want to point this out as we get going here. We are full spoilers. The season is over. We're not going to play as we do at the movies, because not everyone can get to the movie theater, but True Detective ended on Sunday. This episode's going to drop on Tuesday, going into Wednesday. At this point, we hope you've seen it or will see it, so we're not gonna play the non-spoiler game. We are full spoilers all the way through, because we're doing a full season review. We're doing all 6 episodes, just kind of like one mass episode here for us. So just to be aware, if you haven't seen it or you haven't seen the finale, be aware we are going to talk about the entire season, including what happens in the end. So just in case. That being said, no, I would say season 1 definitely had a lot of horror elements. You know what I mean? The occult murders, the creepy killer, the connection to all the different powerful people, the cabal of powerful people in Louisiana. But I think this one, and I think the influence from Issa Lopez, if you haven't seen, not to just repeat what you said, Patrick, if you haven't seen Tigers Are Not Afraid, run to go see it. It's amazing. It's an incredible film. It walks a really powerful line dealing with kids growing up in basically a war torn part of Mexico, and we're talking about drug cartels, which I say war torn because that's what kids grow up in when their families are subjected to atrocities carried out by these powerful figures who are really above the law. It is a horror film, but it also deals with some really powerful imagery, some really powerful subject matters. But it's a great film, and it's incredible for a first-time filmmaker to come out of the gate and just punch you in the mouth the way that Issa Lopez did. So while I still support, Nick Pizzolatto as the original creator, even though, again, I didn't love season 2 and 3, I liked them. I probably liked season 2 far more than the average viewer did. I think a lot of people hated season 2. I still enjoyed it. And season 3, I thought was a return to form. I had a couple of issues with season 3, particularly the ending. I didn't love it, but everything up to that point, I really enjoyed. Honestly, season 3 was great.
Yeah.
Season 4, again, to get into it, was great, but it was fun to take a different ride with Issa Lopez and her vision. Now, I know, just to address the elephant in the room, Nick Pizzolatto very publicly said, I had nothing to do with this season. Don't blame me for it, because he's basically more or less telling you in a couple of messages on Instagram that he doesn't like it and he wants nothing to do with it. He is listed as an executive producer in name only because he created the show. It's his show, so they have to put him on there as an exec. Even though he's not associated and he doesn't work for HBO anymore, they have to put him on there because legally he did create the series. But he had nothing to do with this, and he is telling anyone who will listen that he had nothing to do with this. Whether I agree with him or not, we'll talk about during this podcast, but he had nothing to do with the show. That being said, I was very excited to see what Issa Lopez did with this season. Now, I had a slightly different experience with this show than you did, Patrick, because I actually saw all 6 episodes in a 2-day span. I was invited to a press junket where I got to interview Issa Lopez, Jodie Foster, and Kaylee Reese. Let me just say ahead of time, asking Jodie Foster a single question was one of the greatest moments of my journalistic career. I was so geeked out, and I actually did get to ask her about doing Silence of the Lambs compared to True Detective. I had to slip it in there somehow, and I got her to talk about Silence of the Lambs. I was so freaking happy about that. But because I was doing the press junket before the show debuted, HBO sent me all the screeners. So I'd actually seen the full season before it even debuted. I couldn't share that, of course, because it's under embargo, but I had seen it all. So I had to kind of go back and rewatch some of the episodes getting ready for this, because it had been basically 2 months since I had seen the season.
Yeah.
And I just rewatched the finale as everybody else did on Sunday night. You were a huge True Detective fan. I was obsessed with True Detective. Did you have expectations going into the season? Were you just excited to see something new? Because it had been, like 3 years since the last season?
Something like that. And I did have expectations, which is it's HBO and it's True Detective. So I immediately assumed that it's going to be better than other things that are presented to us. And by the way, TV's doing pretty good. I think everything on FX is like very worthy of talking about. A lot of other HBO shows are really great. Showtime just had a fucking wild show called The Curse from A24 that was, there's a lot of good shows out there, but when it's HBO, it's on a new level. When it's True Detective, I expect an even bigger level. That's the only expectation I actually put on these shows. Now, adding in Issa Lopez, I went, ooh, then what I expect out of this season is horror. And man, I got it. Like, I was so happy with the horror aspects of this. And I think, going back to Tigers Are Not Afraid, and I think actually going back to a lot of Mexican filmmakers, this is something that I think is a through line with filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and Inarritu and oh my gosh, the other guy, Alfonso Cuarón. They can make movies that have a very grounded feeling with a touch of magic. It's just something with the Mexican culture and Mexican storytelling. They just sprinkle in a little bit of magic. And Issa Lopez does that in True Detective Night Country. And it was something where I was like, where is this going exactly? I think that was the big thing. And we might as well get into kind of the one of the overarching themes of the show, which is, I think, indigenous peoples. You and I know, are huge fans of a movie called I think it's called Wind River, right? Taylor Sheridan.
Taylor Sheridan, creator of Yellowstone. I think it's his third movie. He did Sicario. He did Hell or High
Hell
Water.
or High Water, and then
And then,
Wind River.
yeah, correct.
Wind River is about indigenous people going missing in these areas that are being claimed by corporations. And True Detective sort of touches on that in a very similar way. But when you get a female director, when you get a director of indigenous a background, Issa Lopez has Mexican Indian roots. I feel like I was learning things on a different level, and she they focus on the I think it's called Inupiat woman. I think is the way to pronounce that, and this Inupiat culture that is clashing with the cultures of the West. There's a huge mine there, and there's a lot of people that come there to work in that mine, and there's a lot of tension around that, and there is this element of indigenous women going missing, which I'm sure was in Issa Lopez's original idea before HBO came to her, was like, I want to do something about indigenous women going missing. It is a real problem. It's a real problem in Canada. It's a real problem in America. It's a real problem in Mexico. It's a real problem in northern territories where indigenous peoples have lived for thousands and thousands of years. When Western and European societies move in, they seem to disappear. There's an innate horror to that, and it's a horror that you and I can't really speak on. We're not women. We're not indigenous. We don't have those things hanging over us. And so she creates a new environment for me to witness that is just terrifying on its reality face, on the face of its actual reality, Damon. You go, my God, that's a terrible thing that's happening. And then, Damon, do you want to talk about the other side of the horror, which is, I think, what gets our police involved, which is this insane six or seven person murder?
Yeah. So let me real quick. I just want to say, the indigenous people comment you made. A lot of people I've seen online comparing the show to Wind River and saying it's very similar. I would agree in some tone and in terms of subject matter. But the subject matter is indigenous people go missing and no one seems to give a shit. That's the subject matter. And it's sad and depressing, and we need to do better. Movies like Wind River, and even Yellowstone has done this in their show, because Taylor Sheridan has highlighted this in Yellowstone as well. I know you watch Yellowstone, so do I. They highlighted it in there as well, but they did it in Wind River. And the reason why people are like, oh, they're similar, is because this is a subject that needs a spotlight shown on it, and it doesn't happen enough. So yes, indigenous women going missing is similar in Wind River and in True Detective, because this is what happens.
This is a real problem.
And no one gives a shit. That's the problem. Like, so I just want to put it out there, like, on the face of this all, for the people who say it is similar. Yes, it is similar, because indigenous women go missing, no one cares, and we need to stop with that mentality. Authorities, government, whatever it is, needs to do something about it. Thank you to creators and artists like Taylor Sheridan and, of course, Issa Lopez for bringing it to our attention. Okay, that being said, in terms of the story, the actual plot of the show centers around a group of scientists who work at a research station called Salao Research Station. They've been there for like 15 years researching the permafrost in Alaska, and basically digging down to the ice cores of Alaska, trying to find, whatever you find there, like, the secrets of the world. Let's just say, in the broadest of terms, that's what you're searching for. And the opening of the show shows that these men are out there living in this research center, and one of them kind of has this like weird, almost like a hallucination kind of reaction, and lights kind of blink, and then everything kind of goes dark. And when we revisit them, they're all missing. The whole place is emptied out. It's just completely gone. Everyone's gone. And when they finally track down these 7 or 8 scientists, I believe it was 8 originally, which we find out during the show was actually 7, which that plays into the plot. These 7 scientists are nude in the middle of the tundra of Alaska, frozen to death in what they officially dubbed on the show as a corpsicle. A corpseicle. These 7 guys are all huddled together, screaming, basically frozen solid, dead in a mass, all there together, frozen in the middle of the tundra. And our police chief, played by the great, iconic, amazing Jodie Foster, plays police chief Liz Danvers. She is, of course, charged with investigating this, and she ends up running into a former friend, now kind of an adversary, named Angeline Navarro, who is a indigenous police officer who used to work with Danvers in the police station. They had a falling out over a case that just got them to the point of where they couldn't coexist anymore, and Navarro goes off to become a state trooper. But Navarro gets pulled back into this particular investigation because she believes it ties back to a murder investigation of an indigenous woman that would unsolved and effectively ruin the friendship, the relationship she had with Liz Danvers years ago. And so that's kind of where we pick up, as this investigation of 2 very opposite police officers, both trying to figure out why these 7 research scientists were nude, huddled together in the middle of the Alaskan tundra, frozen to death, how it happened, why it happened, and who did it to them.
And can we just take a moment to bathe in the glory of the corpseicle, which got shared? Like, I mean, if there was anything I saw in a consistent way on social media for the first couple weeks, it was the corpseicle. People could not stop sharing this incredible, like, I don't know, like it's almost like Michelangelo's, like, you know, fucking Sistine Chapel, like these frozen screaming bodies, like all trapped in a moment. It's such a glorious design, and I'm curious how it was written on the page. I'd love to actually take a look at the scripts at some point if they ever make it out of there. But it was a thing of beauty, and it was truly horrific. And they show it right there in the first episode, and you go, oh, we're in for some shit this season. Like, it's not like, yes, this is probably going to be a very grounded situation, but it's going to be horrific. And it starts with that corpseicle, which I absolutely loved. I just went, God, what a thing of horror beauty this is.
Yeah, it reminded me, it looked a lot like, you know, what you saw. It reminded me of The Thing. And I'm not just saying that because of being in, you know, the frozen tundra of Alaska versus Antarctica, where that movie actually is supposed to take place. But when you think about when you see all the weird contorted versions of The Thing and the humans that it used to be, that's kind of what the corpseicle looks like. It's this really grotesque, just disturbing image of these 7 dudes huddled together, screaming, painful, dying, and they're all together. And it's like you took 7 mannequins and threw them in there with screaming faces and then just flash froze them. It's hard to describe unless you've seen it, but it's disturbing. And when you put that at the end of your first episode, you have just set the tone for the entire season, because they didn't just murder 7 scientists. They didn't just have 7 scientists go missing. They had 7 scientists flash frozen together in a pile in a screaming, horrific, frozen way to die.
Oh, it was incredible. And it just made me think, because I think we even talked about this a little bit with Stranger Things. It's like some seasons of television are less horror than others, right? And we thought the latest season of Stranger Things had more horror elements than a lot of the previous seasons. Same goes for True Detective. I think the middle 2 seasons were very, very more close to like a standard, like a kind of police thriller, which, by the way, I totally liked and I'm totally fine with. But just seeing that image at the end, you're like, oh, it's so unsettling. It's scary. I think that's what I loved. I'm like, that's scary. Like, it's just scary imagery. You know, is it making me shake in my boots? No, but boy, I can't get it out of my head. And for sickos like you and me, we love shit like that.
Well, it reminds you of the first season when Dora Lang, the murder in the first season, you see her huddled down, tied at the wrists and ankles, bent over, hunched over with antlers tied to her head, blindfold over her face, the spiral symbol on her back. I mean, that sets the tone. When you see that really disturbing image of this poor woman being murdered, same thing with the corpseicle. You set the tone. Now, again, I would agree. Season 2 and 3, not bad. And season 3 had a kind of a disturbing image of a couple dying, but nothing to the level what season 1 and now what season 4 have done. I think that's what separates them from being truly horror shows.
And another thing that I think came back, at least with a vengeance, because there was a little bit of this in season 3, but almost non-existent in season 2, was the return of the supernatural element. And I loved about season 1 is that it kept you guessing all the way to the end about, is this something supernatural? And I remember the debates. Man, that was a fun time when I think Twitter was a little less shitty than it is these days. When people were just like speculating on what it could all possibly mean, they were looking into symbols. They were trying to figure out if it was this monster. I mean, I had people predicting like it's Zool from fucking Ghostbusters. Like there's something bigger, crazier happening. We got a return to that in True Detective season 4, Night Country, and it was so interesting how Issa Lopez and company got into it this time, because what they said was, here we are at the farthest reaches. They're in a fictional town called Ennis, Alaska, which is up in the Arctic. I mean, it's so far north, it's basically the end of the world, if you want to call it that. They say here at the end of the world, things are different, and they don't mean that like literally. They mean it literally and figuratively, is what I should say. The people of this town are like so close to the extremeness of the environment that they're in, and they're so, I think it seems like everybody's very well painted in this town as having a lot of baggage coming with them, that they're almost in touch with some other plane of existence. And you go, well, how far are we going to go with that? I would argue this season goes fully into supernatural. Whereas in the first season, and I'm going to spoil it for you guys, it ended up not being supernatural. It ended up that Rustin Cole he took a lot of acid and he was having a lot of flashbacks is what was going on. But it wasn't supernatural. They didn't come to a supernatural conclusion. This season starts with elements of supernatural. You talk about the flickering lights in Salal Station when that guy is like having what seems to be some sort of a seizure or a vision, and the lights flicker and then things happen that are bad. That motif continues on. The motif that people there can see people from that are dead and they're calling to them, or they are directing them, is it's purely supernatural, but also it's tied to indigenous belief systems, right? So these Inupiat people, they believe they can see people that have passed to the other side, and that those people can help guide them along. So they weave that idea throughout the show, keeping you guessing as to whether like this is indeed a supernatural occurrence, or it's not, and it's totally like human related, or both could possibly be interconnected. I really like the ambiguity of that, and we'll get into like the final in a while. But what I really liked was having a very I guess grounded way of introducing supernatural into this through the Inupiat people.
What I enjoyed about the supernatural elements of this season, while again I agree, season 1 hinted at it, and the cult, and not to keep making the comparisons, but the cult at the heart of season 1, they believed they were working towards a higher power and trying to reach this mythical place known as Carcosa. And they were worshiping a god known as the Yellow King. Now, it all ended up being just this sick, disturbing belief structure that led them to killing children and sacrificing people to appease their cult. But the sheer mention of that had you thinking this could be like some kind of supernatural ties. And it also was elevated by the fact that Rust Cole, Matthew McConaughey's character, because he had taken LSD and gone through these years of being an undercover drug agent, had these like really vivid hallucinations that made you wonder what's real and what's not. The biggest difference with this season is that they literally show you ghosts. There are a number of ghosts throughout every episode. And they mention it, like they say, like they say ghosts will come to you for one of three reasons. They'll come because they want to reconnect with you, they'll come because you forgot they want to tell you something, or they're coming because they want to take you with them. Now that specific mythology set the tone right there, because from then on out, when you saw these ghosts, you had to question, were they there because they missed you? Were they there because they had to tell you something? Were they there because they're trying to drag you to fucking hell with them?
Yeah.
That sets the tone. Now, also what I loved about this, though, is when we do see the ghosts, or we do see the people who are seeing the ghosts, they have a specific connection to the people they're seeing. This isn't just moving into the haunting of Hill House and there's a ghost living there. These are people connected to the people they're seeing. So once again, there's a supernatural element. There are ghosts. But it's left up to the interpretation of the viewer whether or not these ghosts are real, or these are just people seeing what they want to see. There's a situation in this season where Angeline Navarro's sister has mental health problems, and she's desperately trying to protect her, but her sister is kind of teetering on the edge and spiraling downward and struggling. And at one point, Evangeline puts her sister into a care facility with hopes that that will help her turn things around. Sadly, her sister escapes, goes out in the tundra, and basically dives into the frozen water and dies and kills herself. It's a very sad moment in the show, and it profoundly affects Evangeline Navarro. Now, her sister reappears to her later in a vision. And in that moment, you might question, is this real? Is it really a ghost? Is her sister actually back to visit her? Or is this the guilt of her feeling like she could have done more to help her sister, or she didn't do enough to help her sister? And I love the ambiguity of that, because you don't know. It's left up to you to decide. Now, me personally, as a guy, I don't want to turn this into a philosophical debate. But as a person who doesn't actually believe in ghosts, I appreciated that they left it up to that imagination. Like,
yes.
Liz Danvers, Jodie Foster's character, was pretty clearly a non-believer. She didn't believe in any of the supernatural bullshit throughout this entire series. She was the 100%, this is just a case of 6-7 people dying and somebody caused them to die and I'm trying to find the murderers. She didn't believe in any of the other stuff. She kind of, you can kind of see her roll in her eyes when a lot of that came up.
Yeah.
She never really had the experiences with the ghosts because she didn't believe in it. But the people who did, Rose, Navarro, so on and so forth, they had that belief. They had that tie to a person that came back to them. So even me as a person who's like a non-believer, I can sit here and say my interpretation was it was just these people's connection to the people close to them who loved them, and that was their way of staying connected to them. And I get that. I understand that. I also understand the Liz Danvers character, who she didn't have visions of ghosts. She just had visions of horrific nightmares of her past life where her kid died, which continued to haunt her. They weren't ghosts visiting her. They were just memories coming back to haunt her. So I didn't take it as these were actually ghosts living in our world. I took it as these people were being connected to the people they missed or connected with. But my justification of saying that is, if you, Patrick, said these are ghosts and they're coming back from a spiritual plane and they're crossing over into our world and visiting their former loved ones, I'm okay with that, because that's the interpretation that I enjoy about this season of the show, is that neither answer is right, neither answer is wrong.
It's so smart to do this. I did my best to kind of look up as many people's opinions as I could before we got to this podcast. Some people were very frustrated with the non-answer on that, and you nail it on the head. The reason it's smart to do the non-answer is to leave it open to interpretation, because indeed that's how the real world works when it comes to the spiritual realm. I've never seen proof of a ghost, and neither of you. I would classify the both of us as non-believers. But I will have people in my life tell me, no, I heard them call my name. I saw them there in the kitchen. Now, I can't tell them, no, you didn't. I wasn't standing there with them. I didn't see any of it happen. It doesn't matter. And in my interpretation of things like that, it's like, yes, you have this incredibly deep connection to that person, and you manifested it the way you manifested it. But on their side, it's like tangibly real. So to be able to like present that in the show in a way that like makes sense, like, if these two worlds colliding, is like, it's a feat of storytelling, as opposed to some people who are like, oh, why didn't they explain that? It's really frustrating. It's like that, but that's that's a great way to like to synthesize the real world that we live in, which is some of us believe in, some of us don't. And then on top of that, like have there's and they lace it throughout it again, that indigenous tradition where they believe that that is those things are actually important and that you need to be connected to them. So that it was very that to me that whole aspect of it was very fascinating, and it also lent to the horror elements of it too, because let's face it. I mean, I think both of you and I have suffered a lot of serious traumas in our lives, and a lot of people who listen to this show have. There are images that can't get out of your head. There are images you will always see. And then the way Issa Lopez represents them on screen is horrific, but it's also there's a lot of humanity in it, because you go, I know why she's seeing her sister in that way. I know why she's remembering her mom from those moments. We're talking about Navarro's character. Her mom actually suffered mental illness as well, and it seemed her sister was going down the same path. So it was bringing up all these emotions and stuff. It's very emotionally like sophisticated storytelling that just to me, that element of it was like it knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, and I, again, I know I'm not. Listen, we always say this on the show. You and I have an opinion, and we give our opinion. We're a review podcast, so that's what we're here to do. But we always tell people, judge for yourself, right? Like, because we like or don't like something doesn't mean you're going to like or dislike that. We did an Alien 3 review a couple weeks ago, and I put up clips on TikTok. I had some people saying I loved Alien 3. I had other people saying I fucking hate that movie. And you and I were pretty positive for the most part of that movie. But again, not everyone's going to agree with us. True Detective this season, the reason, again, I'm just pointing this out, and I'm not telling people they're wrong for feeling frustrated at the lack of answers in that regard. My justification, my one explanation I would put out there, and I think you'll agree with me on this, Patrick, is that while True Detective is tinged in horror and it is a thriller mystery, murder mystery show, we're not watching The Haunting of Hill House. We're not watching a show that is steeped in it being a ghost show, a haunted house show. This is a show about a murder mystery, tinged in that horror, tinged in that indigenous belief structure, which you talked about with the people we're talking about in the show. We don't like. I'm not of that culture. I'm fascinated to learn about it.
Yeah,
so,
I love learning.
Like, seeing this show was educational for me, and learning about the people's culture was educational for me, and their belief structure was educational for me. So I'm not saying you can't be frustrated. You are absolutely, it's your own right to be frustrated. I'm not saying you shouldn't be frustrated, because I wasn't frustrated, but I'm trying to explain it that this isn't a show meant to be a ghost story. This isn't a show meant to be, The Fall of the House of Usher, or I don't know why I keep going to Mike Flanagan shows. They're horror shows. But they are shows meant to be supernatural. We know they are that. You go into The Haunting of Hill House, it's called The Haunting of Hill House. You know it's a haunted house show. That's not what True Detective is. Now, do they hint? Do they throw clues in there that it could be? Sure. But the reason they're not smacking you over the head with it is because the end of this story was never going to be a ghost rose up from the grave and killed these 7 scientists. That was never going to be the story they were telling.
No, if you've paid attention to True Detective over the years, they always are out there to solve a real crime, and there's a real solution to whatever happened. They have it. Sometimes it's more satisfying than other times, but at the end of the day, they go, okay, we found out who killed these people. It's called True Detective. They're looking for true crime answers, right? They're detecting on true crimes, and they do that. But they sprinkle in that little bit of fantasy. They sprinkle in that little bit of horror. Why? Because it's fun, Damon. And let's just fucking have fun. Like I go on the ride. You talk about expectations earlier. My main expectation is show me what you got. That's the big expectation for a guy like me. Let's talk about characters for a second, because if anything in True Detective that has been true each and every time out is that there are very compelling characters. Damon, this season, I would argue, comes right back to the first season's form in its own unique way. It wasn't Liz Danvers, played by Jodie Foster, and Evangeline Navarro, played by Callie Race. They are not like carbon copies of Rust, Cole, and Marty. They're not. They're completely different than those two cops. But their dynamic is the kind of dynamic that you can latch onto for a season of television. These are people that, as you said in the beginning, they were they were once partners, and now they are at odds. That in and of itself is compelling, and it's kind of mysterious why that's happening and what happened. There was a case that they worked on together, and the way the guy died is a bit mysterious. And then you can pretty easily put together what happened there, but you never really understand the fallout from it. You just get the interactions. You're kind of coming. What I like to say when in writing is you come into the situation a little bit late. You come in and it's already boiling. This pot is already boiling over. When Trooper Navarro comes back into Liz Danvers' life and she's got this huge murder case now on her hands, she's the last person she wants to see. She doesn't want to see Navarro. She's got 8 dead people as far as she knows. What do you want, Navarro? We hate each other. I think this is connected to this case. This woman, Anne Cowtalk, I believe is her name. I think Annie Cowtalk's murder. I think it's connected to this murder, and I think there's plenty of evidence to agree with that. And she's like, I don't want to fucking work with you. Like that, just that initial setup is like, I don't want to work with you, but I will begrudgingly do it because if you think it's going to solve this cold case, my job is to be a good cop, so I'm going to be a good cop here. But we're going to hate each other the whole way through. I love that dynamic, Damon. You want to break down your characters, and I mean, come on. It's really important to True Detective that your detectives are compelling, and I think these two are incredibly compelling.
I want to mention real quick, you talked about connecting this to the Andy Cowtuck murder, that Navarro is convinced this is somehow connected because it was an unsolved murder, and it played a part in the relationship between Liz and Navarro breaking down because it never got solved and basically became a cold case, and Navarro never wanted to let it go, and Liz basically had to say, it's not getting solved, so we have to move on. What I loved about that initial meeting of Navarro and Danvers, and then it continues to pepper out through the first couple episodes, is something that reminded me so much of season 1 when Rust Cole was convinced that the murder of Dora Lang was not the first. This was connected to something in the past, and this was not this guy's first murder. So he started searching and looking for other examples of similar crimes in the past, trying to find evidence. And there's a great part where Marty Hart, they're sitting there having food, and he's like, you're not finding evidence, you're finding conjecture. You're creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. You're believing that this guy was a multiple serial killer. Now, in the end, Russ Cole was right. He proved his theory. But what Marty said in that moment was true. You don't have proof. You have conjecture. You're creating an answer to a question that we can't solve. So you're trying to create a narrative to prove what you think the theory is. That's kind of what's at the heart of Liz and Navarro's problem, is that Navarro is convinced that Annie's murder is connected to what happened at Salal Station, and Liz is like, you have no proof of this. There's nothing to connect these two things together. Now, much like Rust and Marty, we find out it absolutely had something to do with this. But again, I love that dynamic of like the hardened, kind of bitter, just old school cop, Liz Danvers, and then you have Navarro, who is a little distrusting, a little jaded, just kind of bumps up against the system. She's the rebel cop in a way. Like, she's not the one who works within the confines of the law. And
she's getting in fist fights with dudes in the middle of the night. I love that.
I mean, just, she's just like, she's not the one. She is not the one. She's like the rebel cop who doesn't have a partner because she can't have a partner. She's Nick Nolte in 48 Hours, where they're like, no one wants to work with this guy. But that dynamic between them is so good. And listen, we don't need to sit here and we're going to talk about best performance in our categories. We can just go ahead and start praising Jodie Foster right now. She's incredible. But the way she plays this character as this like hardened, like, she is a cop through and through. Like, she she is dedicated to her job, but you can also tell that she's gone through some shit. Like she's seen things that you shouldn't see. She's been through things you shouldn't be been through, and I maybe my interpretation is wrong, Patrick, but like it's almost like I'm sick of this shit. Like I want
Oh,
to solve
very.
this case, but I'm just over it. I'm over all this, and then you got Navarro coming in who is just gung ho to solve the crime, and she wants answers, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to get there. Whereas Danvers really is about following the breadcrumbs. Now she gets a little bit more and more obsessed with the case because the more breadcrumbs she follows, the more threads that get pulled and the bigger this web grows connecting this murder. Then you add in characters like Peter Pryor, the young cop who is the son of the former chief of police, his dad, who basically got bumped down out of his job for Danvers to take his role. And so that guy, played by John Hawkes, is clearly bitter and angry and not happy with the world because he used to be the chief. He's no longer the chief because he probably wasn't very good at his job. And so Danvers basically took his job, and now he's got to answer to her. Yet you can see that power dynamic throughout the entire show. He never wants to answer to her. So he's just very much like, whatever. Like, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to go where I want. I'm going to see what I want. Fuck you, is more or less what he does throughout the show.
Right.
So you introduce him and then you introduce Peter Pryor. Peter, the younger son, is conflicted because he's got a young wife and a baby, trying to be a dad, trying to be a husband, but he loves his job and he's very much Danvers' boy. Like, he wants to please Danvers. Now, they introduce, is that like a mother-son relationship? Is there a little sexual tension there? Is it almost like a Mrs. Robinson thing going on there? They never fully tackle that. They leave that simmering tension throughout the show. Like, what is their relationship? You can tell Danvers kind of treats him as a son, but Peter, you could kind of tell, like, he's got a little bit of the, like, maybe he's not looking at her as like mommy. He's thinking about her in another way.
Different kind of mommy situation.
And then you got Leah, who is Danvers' stepdaughter, not even her real daughter, her stepdaughter. She was married to the father. They had a kid. The kid died in a car accident, and basically Leah is left with Danvers as her stepmother. And Leah is rebellious. She is trying to get more involved in the actions against this mine, which everyone believes is polluting polluting the area, polluting the people. And so she is very much an activist, taking on a role similar to what Annie Kautuk did, that also got Annie Kautuk killed. And so Danvers is trying to pull her back and being like, don't embrace your indigenous roots. It's going to get you killed.
Yeah.
But Leah is more or less like, fuck you. You're not indigenous. You don't grow up. You're not part of this culture. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to be an activist. I'm going to speak out against these people. So there's a lot of dynamics of the different characters you're working with in this show, and they all mesh together really, really well. And you can see the dynamic between them throughout the series.
And I do love speaking on Danvers and how she's so abrasive to, any of the supernatural ideas, any of the indigenous ideas. At one point, Leah has the indigenous traditional painting on her chin. She's like, wipe that shit off. Like, she's doing it in such an abrasive way. But if you look right under the surface, the subtext of it is she's terrified that her stepdaughter is going to meet the same fate that Annie Kautuk met. She definitely on the surface does not respect the indigenous culture at all. She doesn't give a shit about it. It's kind of in the way of her job. That's how she sees it. But deep down, as a mother, she can't help herself. She's trying to protect her in the fucked up way that Danvers can do it, which is like, I'll just scold you and punish you into listening to me because I'm scared to death that you're going to meet the same fate. She's not stupid. Danvers is an incredibly smart cop. She knows that Annie Kautuk definitely died with circumstances regarding the mine and regarding the Salal station she knows it's connected. She doesn't quite know how. She doesn't want to know how, kind of. She's just sort of like, best not seen and not heard. And I don't want to lose another kid. I lost a kid and I don't want to lose this kid. but she does it in her fucked up way because Danvers is fucked up because so much of what has gone on before the events of this show are baked into her characters. Fantastically crafted character, and that's work that Jodie Foster will do, and Issa Lopez will do, and writers will do to kind of to. This is why this is elevated TV, right? I don't believe in elevated horror. I'm just saying like extra quality on top of quality, the expectation I was looking for. You see it in a character like Danvers that is incredibly complex, that is abrasive, that is hard to deal with at times, but none of that is for no reason at all. She's not just shitty. She's not just angry. There are reasons behind it, and they unfold in all many different types of ways in certain degrees. I love another complaint I saw was that the middle episodes were they called them slow and sagging, and what's the point? Well, it revealed so many of the dynamics that were going on and why it made sense that all this stuff was connected. And you learn that Danvers has a pretty serious past, and she's been put in that position to be the chief at Ennis for a reason. She's sort of been what do they call it? Exiled to Ennis. You know, she's a troublemaker. She sleeps around and she's proud of it. She slept with probably every man within sleeping rage age. You know, and that gets her into trouble. She doesn't have a lot of women friends because of that, because she's sleeping with every man she can possibly sleep with. That's just one of her many little dynamics, but it gets in the way of the case. It actually matters to what's going on. She slept with this guy, and this guy's connected to the oil, to the mining company, and that matters to why the mining company's trying to cover up stuff. Like, it all connects, but it's all character work, which is what you're looking for. Navarro, on the other hand, is definitely, I would say, a more subdued character, a character that has internalized a lot of stuff. She's quiet, she's stoic, she has a lot of anger, she carries a lot of anger. You see it. She's also mixed race. You know, she's not just pure indigenous. She's mixed as well, and that changes that creates a dynamic between her and the indigenous people there. She doesn't have her spirit name. I don't know if I'm getting the exact terminology right, but when all these other people have been given their actual Inupiat name, she doesn't have it. That's going to matter throughout the show. That's going to pay off throughout the show. And it led to a lot of interesting speculation I was seeing online. You know, what will her name be? What will her name be when they reveal it? And it turned out to be something that was, you know, I think more subdued and more character focused than it was plot focused, which I liked. I actually appreciated that. People thought it was going to have something to do with something big supernatural, and like she was going to turn into like a sea goddess or something like that. It's like, that's not what True Detective does. If you were expecting that, you're just not paying attention. So I really loved how different these two opposing forces were, you know, with Danvers being super abrasive and Navarro being abrasive, but in a totally different way and for totally different reasons, and with a backstory that's just as complex and just as interesting. It left it for me on the character side. Everything was fulfilled for me. I don't know how you feel, but I just feel like these characters were so well fleshed.
They were. They were very rich and very fleshed out and felt very, very real, which is kind of the point. You want to have real characters that you can relate to or, you know, have conflict with. Before we get to categories, Patrick, I want to touch on two last things, and then we'll get to categories. One, let's get into this right now, which is the ending of the show. And yes. I've heard a lot of people, there's been so much debate over the last, 48 hours since the show ended, what people thought about the ending. Now, I've heard some people, Alan Sepinwall, I believe is his name, the writer from Rolling Stone, says the best True Detective finale ever. I disagree with that, but that's what he said. I've heard other people saying, I feel like I wasted 6 hours of my life, and that ending totally ruined the show for me. Let me just lay out narratively how the show ends, and then we can discuss what we took away from it. So, the investigation into the death of these scientists leads them back to Salal Station, where they find out that the one scientist named Clark, never actually died. They find out that the 8th scientist was actually 7. When they pried all the scientists apart and the frozen bodies became thawed, there was one scientist missing. And they finally track him down, and he was hiding in an underground cellar below the station that leads into a series of ice caves where they were digging out this permafrost. They were doing their studies. He was also the guy who had dated Annie Kaltok, and he had brought her to the station. He was her boyfriend. They were together, all these kind of things. They're convinced that he must have done it. Like, he must have had something to do with this murder. And so they take him to Slough Station. They question him. They more or less torture him in a way. They tie him up and make him listen to Annie's death rattle as she recorded herself as she's being murdered on her phone. They make him listen to this over and over again for who knows how long, trying to get answers. In the end, what it all turned out to be was what this investigation reveals is that the indigenous women who used to work and clean and basically take care of this station for the scientists. They were there to clean, cook, do all the menial jobs for these scientists. They discovered proof that the scientists were responsible for Annie's death. Annie found out that the science station was responsible for the mines polluting the area even worse than had been reported. They were covering up the numbers and actually asking the mine to feed more pollutants into the ground, into the water, because they were getting better results in their permafrost investigation, their permafrost studies, trying to find this mystical answer to the world, this thing that could help solve the world's problems. They were getting closer to this answer by the mines polluting more and more stuff. So they were covering up the numbers, but not because they were working for the mine. They were actually telling the mine to pollute more. And so Andy discovered this. She wanted to uncover it. She wanted to reveal what was happening, and the scientists killed her for it. And they cut off her tongue as a message to basically say, this is what happens when you cross us. But again, they didn't do it. No one.
Well, there's a debate about the tongue thing, but go on.
Well, the tongue thing was done by John Hawke's character. He cut it off.
That's what we believe happened.
He dumped the body and covered it up. Anyways, that's getting off topic. So Annie was killed by these scientists, and Clark was never the same because he actually loved Annie. He actually cared about her, and so he was never the same. And he was the guy who was constantly haunted saying, she's coming back for us. He was convinced that Annie was going to come back for them from the spirit world or whatever. And so that's what we see in the opening of the episode, in the first episode, is when things start going weird, he thinks it's Annie coming back for them. In reality, it was these women who used to work for them as cleaners, as janitors or whatever. They figured out that the scientists killed Annie. When they figure this out and they tell the story, you never actually know, they never say they actually did it, but we know they did. They broke into the station, kidnapped the scientists at gunpoint, dragged them out into the middle of the tundra, made them strip down and took off all their clothes. They laid their clothes down in a pile and they said, we're leaving you here, and you basically fend for yourselves. If you're going to survive, you're going to have to do it on your own, and this is your punishment for what you did to Annie Kaltok. And the scientists ultimately didn't grab their clothes. They went into full-on hysteria and hallucinations due to the hypothermia, and that's how they died. So the big answer at the end of it all is that the indigenous women took revenge on the scientists for killing Annie Kaltok. Now, that all gets covered up. We never find that out because Liz and Navarro figure it out. They figure out the crime, and they go to the indigenous women and they say, we know you did it. And they tell them the story, and they say, well, you know what? It's just a story, and we're just going to have, this case is going to stay unsolved. And so when they go back and we see Danvers talking to the, we assume it's like the police from Anchorage who show up to ask questions. She lays out the proof of what they discovered, but not who was actually responsible. The one big hanging question at the end was Navarro goes out into the wild, and they never really reveal what happens to her. Did she die? Did she live? Is she a ghost now? And so that once again is left up to interpretation. A lot of people I saw online were really pissed
Yeah.
off about that. What happened to Navarro? Because they never say, they never tell you she just left and started a new life in Arizona or something. They
Right.
just show her as like, they show that Jodie Foster and her daughter are close now, and they kind of put their trauma behind them, and Jodie Foster's character's kind of moved on with her life, and everything's kind of back to normal. But whatever happened to Navarro, that's really the hanging question at the end: is did she die? Is she still out there somewhere? They just kind of leave that up to interpretation. Did I explain that fairly well?
Yeah, there's one thing I did want to correct. The case doesn't remain unsolved. What happened is on the flip side, which is the mine. The mine knew what their part in all this problem was, which is they were creating more pollution so the scientists could get their work done, and they know about the body. They actually orchestrated with Hank Pryor to cover up the murder so they could keep everything rolling. So when they send the bodies thawed back to Anchorage, to the forensics out there determine they died in a flash avalanche, right? Which is something that's actually happened in history. They actually brought it up. There was hikers in Russia that died the same way, but it all looked strange. It looked like they'd been attacked by something, and the guys that are kind of above them go, this case is closed, because they don't want it revealed. The cops the cops above them and all that stuff, they're keeping all this shit hush hush because they're all complicit in what happened. So they shut down the case fully, and they just tell Danvers it's done. The forensics say it's an avalanche, so it's an avalanche. Those guys weren't killed. Your case is over. Goodbye. And when they finally figure out what happened, they go, well, we could take all these women to jail, but they technically didn't kill these guys, according to their story. There's no evidence that they killed these guys. And the corrupt fucks above us say the case is closed. These women sought justice. These cleaning women, these women that nobody sees, these women that are invisible to society, including people like Danvers, including people like Navarro. They see them as less than. But those women knew there was a pattern in what we talked about in the beginning, a pattern of indigenous women going missing and nobody doing shit about it. So what did they do when they found out what it was? They said, we're going to do shit about it. And because the corrupt people above them said, case is closed, Danvers and Navarro could wipe their hands of the situation. They just needed the confirmation of what actually happened. They didn't want to be. They found out what happened to Annie Kautak. Now they wanted to find out what happened to these guys, and they got their answer. But they didn't need to punish these women because these women sought justice for something that was never going to get justice. It just wasn't. This thing goes too big. There's too much corruption. It's always going to get swept under the rug. So they found their justice. And they didn't technically kill these guys. They sent them out to the forest reaches of Ennis and said, let nature decide. Meaning, will you be able to survive the cold? Probably fucking not. The nature will take you, right? But in their mind, the spiritual realm took them. The karmic justice served the scientists who brutally killed this woman. So I just wanted to clarify on that little part of there. I found it to be a very satisfying ending. To me, I think, because I think the original theme was like indigenous women go missing and no one gives a shit. And that it was indigenous women taking justice into their own hands because they knew nothing was going to happen. To me, was a very satisfying ending. To some people hated that. And I go, like, I saw a lot of people just confused. And they were like, why didn't she arrest them? And I'm like, well, she doesn't have to. And they technically didn't kill these guys. So she can't get them on that technicality. She can get them for sending them out in there, but she's got no way to prove that they died because of what they did. She's got no way to prove that. So she just goes, okay, well, some women got their justice for once. And some people, believe me, there's a lot of, it seems to be a lot of guys out there that don't like that ending.
Well, also remember the other one thing I want to point out is that before Clark dies, so they basically torture Clark in the station trying to get answers out of him. And at one point, Danvers goes to take a nap. And while she's sleeping, Navarro continues to interrogate this guy, cleans him up, and basically says he wants to die. He just wants to be done with it all. He's done. He wants to die. He wants to just kill himself and be done with it all. He still regrets and feels guilt over what happened to Annie, and all his friends are dead. He just wants to be done with this world. So Navarro basically says, I'm going to clean you up, and I want you to read your confession into this video, and then I'll let you go. And that's what she does. She lets him read the confession into the video, and then she lets him go, and he goes out into the station and basically dies the same way as his scientist friends. He freezes to death out in the middle of the tundra, and Danvers is all pissed off because she thinks he's the key witness to reveal who actually killed this. This is before they discovered that the indigenous women did this, and she's pissed off. Later at the end of the series, we reveal that Clark's video gets released, and in that video, he tells the world what actually happened at the station. That it was the mine polluting everything and creating stillbursts and all these horrible things that were carried out, and they didn't give a shit. And the scientists, the research station, were covering it up and actually telling them to pollute more so they could get better results in their studies. And so that was all revealed through a viral video, more or less, that got released. And so the police asked Danvers, well, how did this video get out there? She's like, I have no idea. Yeah, she knows damn well where it came from, but in her, she's like, I have no idea. It's just out there. Like it got released. I don't know where it came from. We were investigating. We don't know where it came from. It just got out there, and so that's how it ends. Like everyone gets their just desserts in a way. The mine gets shut down.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Research station is shut down, and the indigenous women got their revenge on the people who killed Annie, and of course, and basically at the end, even Clark got his because he died alone in the tundra, frozen to death, and that's basically the ending. Now.
There was one before. Hold that thought, Damon. I just wanted to also give you my take on Navarro missing, because I know that's a bit of a hanging chad, if you will. I do think that what it was her coming to terms with the spirit world, because she was kind of wrestling with it. I think throughout she could see it, and it seemed to just trouble her more and more and more as the series went on. And I think her taking that walk out there was not unlike when the women sent those scientists out into the nature. She's going, nature's going to tell you what the final product is. I think that was Navarro saying, I'm going to let the nature and the spirit world, etc., tell me what my future is. And I think she needed to disappear, and it's purely my interpretation. I've got no evidence to back it up, but I interpreted her ending as she goes off into nature, survives it, and is able to obviously plant that piece of evidence. That's a very important key piece of evidence, and the little polar bear to remind Danvers that indeed the spirit world can help us and can guide us. And I think she lives a life of anonymity. I think that's what she wants. And I think I do think she lives her life out, living with Danvers wherever the hell they live, somewhere out in the farther reaches.
Yeah, because at the end you see the moment where Danvers is like in the sunshine. Now it's like, because they were in like the eternal night part of the Alaskan winter where there's no sunshine for so many days, very much like 30 days a night. At the end, they're kind of like back in summer where the sun's out, the snow's melted, and they're kind of like on a deck hanging out together. And a lot of people were kind of like, what does that mean? Like, did Navarro survive? And I took it very much like you took it. She went out, found her way in the world, found her indigenous roots, and kind of embraced that. And then she came back. And now her and Danvers are back to where they were years ago. They're friends, they're comrades. But Navarro's no longer in the police force. She's just, and again, Navarro was also a soldier before. They have flashbacks of her dealing with like the trauma, the PTSD of being a soldier at war. And so now the way I interpreted it was that Navarro and Danvers are friends, and they're just together, much like with her daughter. They're just like part of it. They're all family now. Like they're all part of the same family. They've all kind of accepted each other, their roles in each other's lives. That's the way I took it.
They all three of them needed a family too, right? They were all kind of missing family, and they all found it with each other.
Yeah. So now let's get into the part of the show that really, really, really bugged me to no end, and clearly for this first part of the podcast, if you've listened to this, if you're here to this point and you've stuck around, everything's been pretty positive. You and I both really enjoyed this show. It was well acted, well directed, well written, and the ending didn't bother me nearly as much as it seemed to bother a lot of people. But there's one aspect of this show that bothered me to no end, and let me just get it off my chest right now.
Please.
If you go back to the original trailer for the first tease of True Detective Night Country, I know you hate trailers, but I love a good trailer. Right at the end of the first trailer, they show Navarro and Danvers walking into a building and shining a light on a giant spiral symbol. Now, if you are a fan of the first season of True Detective, your antenna exploded upwards because that spiral symbol was a huge part of the first season of True Detective. It was the moniker, it was the mark, the symbol of this murder cult that Reggie Ledoux belonged to, that Errol Childress belonged to, that was all connected to the family, the Tuttle family.
Tuttles, yeah.
The powerful Tuttle cabal. They were all part of this murder cult, this sacrificial murder cult that killed children, and all for hundreds of years. We have to imagine they were doing this in Louisiana. That symbol was tattooed on Reggie Ledoux. It's the symbol they painted on the back of Dora Lang when they murdered her. It was scarred in the back of Errol Childress, the actual murderer, the big bad, the man with the scars. The big bad at the very end of the series. He had it basically scarred on his back. Very, very, very huge part of that show. So right away, if you go back and look at my website, Nerdcore Movement, when I started writing about the show before I'd even seen a day of it, I was like, this connects to season 1. They're already teasing it. It's happening. Then, in the first episode of the show, we meet a character named Rose. She's a friend of Navarro, kind of almost like a spiritual guide in a way to Navarro. They're friends. She lives out in the middle of nowhere in the tundra. And she mentions that she had a conversation with a ghost who is her ex-boyfriend. His name happens to be Travis Cole. He died of leukemia, but he comes back and visits Rose every now and again, and that's where Rose gives the speech about the spirits come back to you for 3 different reasons and all that. Didn't take very much for sleuths as myself to figure out that Travis Cole is Rust Cole's father. If you go back to season 1 of True Detective, he mentions his father's name was Travis Cole, or they actually say it to Rust. They say, your dad's name was Travis Cole, and he says, my dad died of leukemia. Doesn't take a genius to figure out that Rose's boyfriend was Travis Cole, was Rust Cole's father. So that's connected. Boom, right away. Okay, there's another connection. Then as they're investigating the Salal research station, Peter's job is to find out where the money's coming from because they believe this could have been some sort of act of revenge or something to do with what the research scientists were doing. Peter, through his investigation and digging into it, he finds out that they were funded by a shell corporation, and he finally tracks down the main benefactors of the research station and the mine. And it's a company called Tuttle United. There's that name, the powerful Tuttle Cabal of Louisiana. Holy shit. It is this cabal, this powerful family is influencing even in Alaska. And then that symbol, the spiral symbol, comes up over and over. It was tattooed on Annie's back. Huge painted on the top of this trailer that Clark had out in the middle of nowhere that they discover. All these symbols, all these different things, and you're like, we're going back to Carcosa. This is somehow, they laid so many breadcrumbs that this was somehow connected back to season 1 of True Detective. When I was watching this, in a binge. I didn't watch it week to week. As I said, I got to see him early. At the end of the 5th episode, I can't remember the exact moment how it ends, but I remember when the 5th episode ended, I looked at my girlfriend Taylor, who loved the first season as much as I did. She's not as obsessed as I was, but she loved it. And we looked at each other, we're like, people might be like, dude, you shouldn't have gone this far with it. But in my head, I was like, dude, Matthew McConaughey is going to fucking appear in this last episode. He's going to come out, and that's going to be the big revelation that this is tied back into that occult murder, and he's going to continue and finish his investigation all these years later. He's going to pop up because they laid so many breadcrumbs In the end, it meant nothing. None of it meant anything. The spiral, yes, the spiral, they said, is a symbol of indigenous people, and it's a warning sign. If you see that symbol, it means bad, it means evil, it means bad, and I get that. The Tuttle United thing was a nice hint, but it really meant nothing. I mean, they were funding it, but they had nothing to do with, I mean, could you say they were behind the pollution there? I guess, but again, they didn't, it wasn't like we saw.
It's probably one of their many like things that they spend money on and make money on.
It had nothing to do with like the Tuttle family,
right? No Carcosa, yeah.
None of the Yellow King rituals. Yeah, they weren't coming up there to kidnap children to kill them. None of that.
No.
And the Travis Cole, yes, it was Russ's father. We know it was Russ's father, but really it was just like a nod. He was just there.
Yeah.
Patrick, let me tell you, none of that was necessary. And the reason it made me so angry is because you laid so many breadcrumbs hinting at a connection to season one that when it doesn't pay off, and I saw a million TikTok videos, I saw a million things online, people saying this is Carcosa, it's the Yellow King, it's the Tuttle family, holy shit, it's connected, blah, blah, blah. And let's be honest, this is also to blame HBO. They used it a ton in the marketing. They wanted you to believe that this season tied back to season one. In the end, it didn't at all. Nothing mattered. That spiral symbol, while it technically you could say it was evil and warded people away, and yes, maybe that's what the Tuttles corrupted and used it for their symbol in their cult, they could have used any symbol for that. It didn't need to be that spiral. You know what I mean? Like, they could have done anything with that. My biggest complaint is that it didn't connect. It didn't mean anything. It had no, I mean, yes, Travis Cole was a ghost in the show, and yes, that's Russ's father, but it really meant nothing. It could have just easily been Travis Tritt, the fucking country music singer, because that's all that mattered. I don't care that it didn't connect to season one. I don't. I didn't need, like, they had a little hint of that. They dropped a breadcrumb in season 3 when they said, do you remember there were 2 hero cops who were investigating a cult, and they were trying to connect the murdered children in season 3, and they briefly mentioned Rust and Marty, and they showed a newspaper. Every True Detective season 1 fan clutched our pearls, thinking, "Holy shit, they're going to bring it back." It didn't. It meant nothing in the big scheme of things. Same thing here. The reason I got so angry is because you laid all the breadcrumbs, you gave all the teasers, all the hints, and it meant nothing. Now, to be clear, I don't care that it meant nothing, but don't put it in there. It didn't need to be there. I understand you're trying to pay homage. You're trying to, basically say, I loved the first season, so let's inject elements of that. Issa Lopez, I adore you. You're an incredible filmmaker. The tone and the evolution of your show was enough for me to believe it was an homage to season 1. Your characters, your development, everything you did was a closer interpretation of season 1 than anything since then. Even what Nick Pizzolatto, the creator of the show, did in season 2 and 3. You didn't need all this other stuff because all it did was give people like me that are a huge fan of season 1 think there was going to be some weird payoff that this somehow was connected to season 1, and it meant nothing. And it left a bad taste in my mouth because it just didn't need to be there. I would have loved this show from start to finish if everything was the same, except the symbol wasn't the spiral, the guy's Travis name was Travis Johnson, and the company running things was, I don't know, Meghan Markle United. I don't care. I didn't need it to be connected. Don't do that. That made no sense to have all that in there.
Damon, I'm going to counterpoint because I feel completely different about this. I think, and I count myself among rabid season 1 fans. I really do. I didn't. You wrote about it and all that stuff. I didn't. But I adore the first season. I think all the fans should be thanking HBO for including this in, because ever since the first season, people have been begging for some sort of connection to Marty and Rust. They've been begging for it. I'm sure what they did was saying, how do we incorporate something into this season so it's a nod to the fans and what they want? But the internet gone internet. Now, Damon, you're much more level-headed than your average internet shit poster by a lot. This is what happens when you give people on the internet a sprinkling of what they want. They just hate it. They get mad about it. Truth be told, if Russ Cole popped up in the final episode and saved the day, that would be absolute horseshit. It would devalue all the work that Danvers and Navarro did and all that stuff. Is like, here comes Matthew McConaughey to save the day like a fucking superhero. That would have sucked. That actually would have been a very shitty ending, because it's clearly like just a Deus Ex Machina. Like none of the story we just watched mattered, because all that matters is that Russ Cole comes to save the day. Because let's be honest, everybody loves Russ Cole. We just want him back. I get it. There's probably a myriad of reasons why you can't bring Russ Cole back. Nick Pizzolatto might own the character right. There's a lot of things that you might not be able to actually physically put Matthew McConaughey on screen again. But I also think it's just a total cop-out if they did that. So I'm glad they didn't. What they did was they gave us sort of a shared universe, which every internet fan is dying for when it comes to movies and TV series and stuff like that. They want it to all connect. They want the Tarantino-verse. They want everything inside the Tarantino-verse to be connected. And at some point, I think Tarantino has like obliged people and been like, yeah, that happens to connect with that and all that stuff. But he's doing that for the fans. So I watched a lot of the videos you sent me. It was all pure speculation. People were like, one guy was like, this is the proof. This is all the proof we needed. Carcosa's back. And I was like, there's no proof. There is zero proof that Carcosa's back. You just are seeing the symbol. And the way I interpreted it, and this is purely interpretation, is that what I got out of the symbol was that I found the origin for the Carcosa's symbol, where they got it from. They clearly had done business up here in Ennis. They clearly helped put this mine together. They put the money into it. And when they were up there, as conquerors and colonials and invaders tend to do, they find indigenous stuff and they latch onto it. As you said earlier, they co-opt it, they corrupt it, and for their own gain, right? The Nazi symbol is a Buddhist symbol of peace. And they went, cool, we like that. We'll take that. And all of a sudden, that Nazi symbol is only associated with the Nazis. Occultists have done it for, ad nauseum since the beginning of written history. They take pieces of ancient culture and they co-opt it. It's no mistake that the ice cave that we find has this incredibly preserved fossil in it, in this spiral. Clearly, the people of this particular part of the world hold that sacred. They say there's something about that's incredibly sacred. That spiral represents, some sort of pattern, that everything turns in on itself. Everything is connected. And they get into that too. And so they found that piece to be sacred. Well, the scientists, they also were digging in those caves for things that they want to learn about. And then they start co-opting the symbol. The Tuttles co-opt the symbol. It's all just sort of part of the same shared universe. I didn't need Carcosa to come raging back. I didn't need the return of the Yellow King. I didn't need any of that stuff. But what I got instead was just, there's a richer history to the True Detective universe. And they gave the fans what they want. And the fans just were like, no, what we wanted was Russ Cole. What we wanted was the Yellow King. And you're like, damn it, I can't please any of you people.
Well, and again, my complaint is that it just wasn't necessary. Like, don't put, because
I hear you.
You raise the
expectation. Yeah.
You raise the expectation by dropping these little breadcrumbs in there and saying, ooh, this is here. You don't do it by accident. It's all in there for a purpose. Like,
yes.
You know they're doing it. And when I talked to Issa Lopez and I asked her about the influence of season 1 in this season, she said this is a love letter to season 1. Now, a love letter can mean a lot of things. Love letter can mean just the tone of the show. I think she nailed the tone of the show.
Oh, yeah.
She nailed the tone of the characters. The tone of all of that is great. But much like, and I would, if I ever talked to Nick Pizzolatto, who I think is an incredible writer, I would hold his feet to the fire the same way about season 3. Why did you need to put in that little breadcrumb about Rust and Marty? Because it meant nothing, and you're just making people anticipate that this somehow connects back to see when they did that. It was an investigative journalist talking to Mahershala Ali's character, and she's like, "Have you heard this story about these 2 hero cops who discovered an occult murder ring or murder cult? Is this connected to your dead children from 1980 or whatever?" Now, every huge True Detective fan had the same reaction. Holy shit. This is that cult is now connected to this show. It wasn't. It meant nothing. It had no connection. And I would tell Nick Pizzolatto the same thing. Don't do that, because Nick Pizzolatto was asked multiple times, would you ever do something else with that character, Russ Cole? And he said, sure, there's a possibility. And Matthew McConaughey's gone on the record numerous times. It's one of his favorite characters he's ever played. He would love to revisit it if there was ever a version that he could do and get back into the body of Russ Cole again. Everyone loves that first season. We all acknowledge that. But it's an anthology. It ends. End it. Be done with it. Move on. Second season didn't connect at all, and I think people expected it to be the first season, and when it wasn't, it pissed people off because it wasn't a cult. It wasn't, it was a show. The second season was really about a story about money and corruption. It had nothing to do with like occult murder cults or anything like that. Yeah. It was just money and corruption of this little city in California. The third season, once again, teetered on the edge of these children being murdered, and it kind of felt the tone was there. The investigation that lapsed over all these years, different time periods. Okay, you got the model back. And then they dropped that one little nugget in there about the question about, is this connected? And I'm like, why would you do that? Because everything else about that season was perfectly done. You did the time jumps. You did the investigation that lasted from 1980 all the way through 20, whatever year they ended it in. Like, all that stuff was there. That was all perfect, spot on. The model of True Detective had been followed to a T. And then you made the mistake of throwing it in a newspaper and saying, could it be connected to this cult back in 2012 that these hero detectives discovered? And we're like, no, because then it went nowhere. Same thing here. Didn't need to be there. You had the tone, you had the characters, you had the plot, you had the story, you had everything right. And then you had to drop in these little breadcrumbs for nut jobs like me who loved and obsessed over that first season. As I said, I have no problem with the story. I have no problem with the ending. I have no problem with anything in this season except that one thing, because you laid those breadcrumbs and you made it important to the show. You didn't just say, okay, Travis Cole's the one element that you kind of like. It didn't really. You could, if they just included Travis Cole, that he was involved with Rose, that would have been fine, because he really played no bearing on the show. He was a ghost, and he just happened to be involved with Rose and happened to also be Russ' father. That could have been the one, and that's all you had to do. End it there, because he had no consequence to the show. But then you pepper in Totally United. You pepper in that spiral symbol. And then in the final episode, you decide to have Clark utter the words, "Time is a flat circle." Stop. Just stop. Don't.
But see, Damon, but see, here's the thing: is that fans were clamoring for it, and I guarantee you, it probably wasn't in Issa Lopez's first draft, or at least in the first discussions before she started outlining it. I guarantee you, it was HBO going, "Hey, the fans keep asking for a real connection."
No, Issa has said it was her idea. She peppered.
Okay, well, fair enough, right? But I mean, of course she did it, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's her idea, but also they were probably like, hey, can you make up an idea that will connect to the first? That's what they mean by "this is my idea," meaning people are nudging, like going, listen, our fans are. True Detective season 1 is a phenomenon in television, a true phenomenon. I would say Lost, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, and True Detective are true phenomenons in television. They transcend the entire medium, and the world is just like, these are the coolest TV shows that ever existed. Okay, Lost shit the bed at the end. But my point is that they were so incredibly formative to the television watching audience. And so what was planned as an anthology it outgrew itself because people were so obsessed with the story that was being told that they said like, and they were so disappointed that season 2 was nothing like the first season at all. The studio takes notes. Nick Pizzolatto takes notes. They go, okay. They really want something from that. They're giving the fans what they want. And that's what's frustrating about it for me, is that you can't please the masses. Either you give them a full connection to Rust Cole and he comes roaring back, and then the fans will complain about that. Trust me, there will be people who will just go, that was bullshit. Why did you do that? And then there's fans on the complete opposite end of it going, why did you even bother to tease us? Which is, I think, where you're at. You're way more level-headed than like everybody I saw on the internet, by the way. Everybody on the internet was losing their fucking minds, but they were sounding rather stupid. They didn't have a real good argument. You know, your argument is like, it was too much of a tease to not pay it off. And I just interpret it different. And we've talked about this through the whole podcast. Go ahead.
Let me throw out this one thing. You said something because the Tarantino verse, and I would agree. And Kevin Smith does this as well, where the characters are connected.
Right. Yeah. So View Askew verse.
Yeah, those connections are just almost like fun little nods, but they never play a role in the actual story. Like Vincent Vega is related to Mr. Blonde's character or whatever, he's Vic Vega. They're actually brothers, and they mention that, and little things like that, things like that are hinted. And same thing with Kevin Smith, the girl Julie Dwyer, who dies in Clerks, gets mentioned as the character who has died at the beginning of Mallrats, who kind of sets the entire chain of events off. It's all connected in that way, but not in a consequential way. Like, it's just very, very tertiary, very like surface level. Where I would compare what they did in True Detective, because again, Travis Cole's the exception, because he really meant nothing. That's the one that you could have.
That's the thing I would have kept out, to be honest with you. I would have kept Travis Cole out, and I would have kept the spiral in.
But I'm saying Travis is the one thing that didn't matter. Like, you could have said, right. Oh, Travis Cole. And everyone's like, oh my God, it was Russ' father. And that's the end of it, because he was in one episode and it just happened to be, then he was Alaska. Okay, fine, whatever. When you pepper in that the whole place was funded by Tuttle United, we understand what Tuttle is.
Yeah.
And you put in the spiral, which is 100% tied to the murders of all these people in Louisiana. The time is a flat circle was kind of a cheesy line. It didn't need to be in.
Little cheesy, but also they're both quoting Nietzsche. I mean, that's not crazy, but it was a little corny. It was a little corny.
But those two things in particular, the spiral and the Tuttle United, because they specifically tied it into the story, it doesn't pay off, because that's where I'm talking about the connection. It didn't need to be there.
Can I counter this? Let
me finish. The way I say it's not like the Tarantino verse or the View Askew verse is because imagine if, like, everyone's complaining right now about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but imagine if at the end of Avengers, sorry, spoilers, 10 years after the fact, at the end of Avengers, you go into that post-credit scene, Loki gets defeated, they took away the Tesseract, they saved the world, and that post-credit scene, the big reveal is the man behind it all, the guy who orchestrated this whole thing, was Thanos. Now, comic book fans like myself, who has a freaking Infinity Gauntlet tattooed on his hand, were like, holy shit, Thanos is the big bad. This is a game changer. This is amazing. Now, imagine if they revealed that in Avengers and then Thanos never appears again. He's not the big bad.
But I don't think that's comparable.
No, what I'm saying is like you've injected it into this, and now he has no real relevance. He was just like a post-credit scene to appease the fans. It played no relevance whatsoever in the rest of the series.
But I don't think it's comparable here.
Well, no, what I'm saying is it's connected. If you do the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you connect all these different pieces, but you don't pay them off, it's going to piss off the fan base. The reason why Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame did so well is because it paid off everything they had worked towards for 10 years and 20 some odd movies. It all paid off in those two movies that finally worked. The reason why the current Marvel Cinematic Universe is failing, or some people are upset, is because it's not connected. It doesn't feel like one cohesive story, and it's just all kind of like mishmashed together, and it's not been very good. And people are like, this isn't making any sense. But everything in all those Marvel movies paid off in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers.
Yeah, it was all one. Really, it was just Iron Man and winter Iron Man and Thanos going to clash. That was the long game. That truly was, because it started with Iron Man and it ended with Endgame. We're getting into the weeds.
Well, my point being, it was all one grand story, and then
Yes.
it paid off in the final two movies. Now, a big part of what's going on right now is people are complaining that it's not. It feels like, what are you doing? Like, are you leading to our story? Because this doesn't feel connected at all. My point being with True Detective, going back to it all, is like, this isn't just mentioning a name. Like, Danvers grew up in Louisiana, and she used to work for the Louisiana State Police. That would have been a nod you could do. Like, oh shit, she probably worked with Rust Cole and Marty Hart in those days, or something like that. Or again, the Travis Cole of it all, because it's mentioned. He's involved with Rose, doesn't play any part. But those two key elements, Tuttle United being behind the mine and the research station, and the spiral symbol, which again, I understand your interpretation of it just being something that the Tuttle's corrupted, but even that's not explained. You're
That's my interpretation of it. Yeah.
But that symbol made it seem like it had something. Now, we can all say it's a red herring, which is what it ultimately was. It was all, we all got.
All
right?
of it was a red herring. Yeah.
All of it. But again, if it doesn't matter, don't use that stuff.
That's where I disagree. I think it does matter. It mattered. Well, the symbols totally mattered to those people, the Inupiat people. So it did matter. It mattered to them.
But it's a symbol they made up for True Detective in season 1. So it's
but my point is that they made it matter here. They made it mattered in the here and now. It didn't tie it back to that.
But it didn't matter. It was just it was the spiral symbol meant to tease people that it was connected to season 1.
Yeah, sure. Because that's what people wanted. But that's what people wanted.
But that's what I'm saying. You're missing the point. You don't need to use that. If you use that symbol, you are teasing people that it's connected to the spiral that everyone knew.
But it is connected to that spiral. But it is connected.
It's not. Because
but it totally is.
It's not. Where in this season did they mention the cult murders from season 1?
Because they mentioned the Tuttles. If they never mentioned the Tuttles, you actually have a point. But the fact that they do mention the Tuttles makes me go, the Tuttles were here.
But you're just guessing at that. They didn't.
But I'm not guessing. They tell you that they funded this thing. It's not a crazy leap. It's not even a hard logical leap to go, oh, the Tuttle's been here. They're clearly they come up here to suss the land and whatever. They want to own the land and shit. They ingrain themselves in the culture up there and they go, oh, we like that symbol. We'll take that back with us. And so what you're getting is a weird little origin story for that symbol. But all they were trying to do was drop a little bit of something for fans to go, hey, I know this was such a big deal in season 1. Wouldn't it be fun if we showed you the origin of it? And fans go, no, I don't want to see the origin of it. And it's we just tried something for you.
That's not, but see, you're interpreting it as that. That's not necessarily the way I took it. Yes, I understood.
I guarantee that's how they make the leap.
Maybe, but again,
it's not a hard leap. It's not. It's a very small jump.
When they revealed the Tuttle United thing in the 3rd or 4th episode, whenever it was, when Peter does that, it's done at the very end of the episode. It is done as a cliffhanger to tease that it's connected to season 1. The big spiral used in the trailer and used throughout the series, they did it over and over and over again to make you think that it was tied back to the first season. That's my problem. You keep peppering it in there. And I don't listen, I know your interpretation, and maybe you're right, that that's the interpretation. They want you to come to the conclusion that the Tuttles corrupted the symbol. But they don't tell you that. You can just say you're making that leap and assuming that. We don't know that. We just know that it's a symbol that is like a warning sign. And that's all they say. They don't ever connect it. And when they do the investigation, when they investigate the spiral symbol, when Peter's looking up what it means, they never find that would be. Listen, you are the worst investigator in the history of investigators. If you look up that spiral symbol and that's not the 3rd thing on Wikipedia, that is the symbol they found in this occult murder series. Because imagine, if you will, True Detective is a real story. Imagine season 1 as a real murder investigation in the Dory Lang, and then 17 years later that they finally catch Errol Childress as a killer. Imagine that. Now, this is all in the internet age. That would be a Netflix documentary. That would be a Hulu documentary. There would be 1,000 articles written about it. It would be one of the most well-known cases ever written. It would be right up there with Manson and Bundy and all these things. Everyone would know about it. Even if you don't know about it, you kind of know about it, right? The fact that they did the investigation into the spiral, and they're like, what does this symbol mean? And he's like, oh, it's an indigenous symbol that means evil. It's a warning. He looked on the internet. He's like, he couldn't find anything at the beginning. It would take 2 seconds to figure out where they would be in that. That's what if they wanted to connect it, if they wanted to say it was corrupted by the Tuttle family, he would have mentioned that they found it, because you'd find that in 2 seconds.
But you don't have to hammer people over the head.
My point is you're taking it and saying that's, I appreciate that that's how you took it. But that's, again, but they don't say that's the reason. They don't.
Well, because why make this season all about them?
But that's my point. Why does it matter? Why did it need to be in there in the first place?
Just to give fans a little something.
Let me ask you a question. Would the series have changed in any way, shape, or form if it was Johnson United was the company and it was a weird A-like symbol, whatever, and that was the symbol of these indigenous people and it meant a warning? Would anything else of the series have changed?
No, and that's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the Travis guy's name was Travis Johnson.
Right. Somebody totally different. Yeah.
Do you see my point, though? Nothing else changes in the series.
Yes. That makes my point.
But you pepper in these little elements and you make people like me, you're like, oh, this has got to be connected. And then when it doesn't pay off, it's like, why bother? Why?
This is why. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why bother. This is why I have always insisted that studios never listen to the internet. They did this. You're asking why? Why did they do it? Just to give the fans a little something. Just a little something to connect back to the most beloved season of television. I don't think it backfired at all. I don't think it backfired at all. How did it backfire?
Do you not see the reaction on the internet of people who were like,
I don't give a shit about Damon. The only opinions I care about are my wife's and yours. And truth be told, the internet honestly is a dumpster fire. It truly is. I mean, I know you agree with me on that.
I understand that, but I'm saying, like, the fans who are going to watch this show, fans are the ones who are going to tune in and watch this show. I've seen a 50-50 split of people who are like, this was amazing, this was incredible television, I loved it. And then the other half of the people, and most of it is connected to the love for season 1, saying the payoff was horse shit. I didn't like it. What was the point of all that? That was the ending. I can't believe that's what you did. Now, as I've said, I'm not going off on the cuckoo end of things, and I'm not saying it all sucked.
That's all I could find was either cuckoo or they liked it.
I liked the series. I liked the ending. I don't mind the ambiguity to the ending. I don't need you to just hammer me over the head. Now, you know, could you have gone a little further down the A24 ladder and made it more confusing? It would have irritated me, maybe.
Oh, yeah, they could have done that.
This didn't do that to me. But as I said, and this is, you got to agree with me on this, Patrick. You say don't try to appease, don't do the whole fan service thing. Don't try to appease the internet. It will,
because it turns into this. And not because of anything else, because people aren't grateful when they give you a little something. People just go, I didn't want that. I wanted something else.
But that's what I'm saying. This is where you should be agreeing with me on. If they didn't do this, if they didn't try to appease fans in any way, or Issa Lopez, and again, I don't know that it was them trying to appease the fans. Issa Lopez said she injected elements of the first season on purpose because she loved the first season.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Again, my point being, why?
But why not? But also, my point is also, why not? Like, that's the problem, is that I think the internet has sucked the joy out of just enjoying something. Like, just enjoy that there's a little bit of connection to it. But people are like, no, it needed to be this. And I'm like, that's just your expectation. they're just giving you something to enjoy, but people don't want to enjoy it. That's what's maddening about it. It's like, as a creative, you go, well, let me write something in there because I know how much I loved the first season. Like, imagine if you and I were given the keys to True Detective season 5, and they go, okay, it can't be a Rust and Cole story, but if you want to do stuff, wouldn't you want to sprinkle stuff in for fun?
I'd want to, if I was going to make it consequential to the story, if it had some relation.
No,
to
but that's
story.
what I'm saying. They're saying you can't make a Rust and Cole story.
No, you can't make a Rust and Cole. But again, when I was like in my head thinking, oh man, Rust Cole's going to show up. Now, again, I understand the whole Rust Cole saves the day. I wasn't even going that far. I was just saying.
No, I know you weren't. Some people were.
He was going to play some part in like here's the connection to this thing, and here's like my help, and then Danvers would solve the crime. That was my idea. But even without that, like even if it's not the Rust Cole of it all, like just them realizing that it was this connection to like the Tuttles were involved. It's this evil corporation that ties back to this cult accusations of Louisiana, whatever. They did that little bit of a payoff. But again, none of that mattered. And I understand it's a red herring. You're trying to get people to look one way. You try to get them to look left so you can go right. I understand all that. And they did that throughout the first season of the show. They had you thinking it was one thing and it wasn't. And they had you thinking the case was solved and it wasn't. All these little things. I understand all of that. But again, it serves no purpose to put it in there if you're not going to have it pay off in some form or fashion. Imagine, and this is, again, I love the movie, but there's a reason why so many rabid Halloween fans hate Halloween 3. Because imagine if you saw Halloween 2, 1, Michael Myers, Halloween 2, Michael Myers, you go to Halloween 3, and Michael Myers isn't there. Now, everyone involved with that movie, John Carpenter on down, says if you would have just made this a movie called Season of the Witch, people would have probably loved it.
Yeah.
But because you called it Halloween, people had the expectation that Michael Myers was going to show up. Now, that film eventually became a cult classic because a lot of fans came around and understood the genius of it. But every other Halloween movie ever made has something to do with Michael Myers, except for that one. And it's like the bastard child of the Halloween series.
Right.
Some people, like myself, absolutely love it. I have the freaking mask hanging out behind me. I love Halloween 3. But in 1984, whenever that movie came out,
people lost their fucking minds.
Yeah. Imagine making a movie called Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger doesn't show up. Imagine making Friday the 13th and Jason Voorhees.
Imagine making a season of True Detective that has nothing to do with Rust and Cole.
Hold on.
That's season 2. Season 2 is your season of the witch.
Let me finish. They set True Detective up from the day one as an anthology.
Yeah.
Season 1 is over. We move on. Now, did season 2 pay off the way people wanted? Because it wasn't even that it didn't tie to season. We knew it wasn't going to tie to season 1. They told us that. Season 1's over. Those characters are gone. They said that from the very beginning. People knew this was an anthology. And so it wasn't that. It was the tone of the show was different. It was a completely different style of detective show, and people didn't like it. And it was kind of convoluted. It did get a little confusing at moments. And again, I liked season 2, but I can understand some of the criticisms. And also, Nick Pizzolatto, not to like rehash history, he actually said it has to do with the occult history of the transportation system, and it had nothing to do with that. And you're like, what was that? What was that about? Anyways. And then season 3 goes back to the True Detective format, which again was great. The time jumps, multiple different time periods, the investigation of the last years. That's the homage to season 1. And then that whole newspaper thing again. Why? It doesn't need to be there. I understand you're trying to like appease fans.
Yeah.
Don't do that. And so that's all I'm saying. That's last thing I'll say on that is just I would have appreciated it more if they didn't do that. If they didn't try to appease fans. And that's where I'm saying you should agree with me because
I 100% agree with don't bother appeasing fans because you will never appease them.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. All the hints to season 1 didn't pay off, served no purpose, and all it did.
I disagree with that statement, but go on.
All it did was lead people to think there was some connection to the first season. Whether it was ultimately like a Rust Cole mystery or not, I don't even care about that.
Right.
Just you laid all the breadcrumbs that it had some connection to the first season, and it meant nothing. So that's why I said I would have been every feeling I have about this season would be the same if it was Travis Johnson, Johnson United, and a symbol instead
Yeah,
of a
yeah,
spiral
yeah.
symbol. All the series would all be the same. I would love it and enjoy it, enjoy the ending, enjoy the story, enjoy the plot, all of it. But I don't need that. If it doesn't, and this is TV, this isn't real life. Like,
Yeah.
this is TV. You're doing it for a purpose. You're putting it in there for a purpose. You put it in the trailer for a purpose. Every single article written about that first trailer of True Detective, there's hints to season 1.
Oh,
It's
sure.
to season 1. They did it on purpose to get everyone souped up.
And there are ties to season 1. Yes, the Tuttle family. Okay, it's not the sexiest tie to season 1, but it's a tie to season 1. And what I liked was that it made it actually lifted the sort of the ominous nature of that symbol and said, so more often than not, these symbols of fear are usually co-opted and corrupted, as you put so brilliantly earlier, by bad actors. And then, so what I got out of this was, oh, that symbol actually means something so much more important than what those crazy killers in Louisiana were doing with it when they were fucking just geeked out of their minds on fucking meth and shit. And they liked they symbol and they just took it. So I was just like, oh, cool. Like, this symbol means something more. That's my interpretation purely.
Again,
but it's just a great way to enjoy a little bit of a nod to the first season as opposed to be mad about it.
To go back, I'm not trying to repeat myself, just saying, if you're right, and that's what it was supposed to be, okay, fine. Let's say that's it. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you probably are.
And I'm saying it's my interpretation.
In some level, you're probably right. Because when I say that earlier about, like, they co-opted and corrupted the symbol, you're probably not wrong about that. Then go back to my point about Peter Pryor investigating it. When he's investigating the symbol, he should find that it had something.
Oh, sure, he could.
Like that would be like, again, I'm not trying to be aware. I'm using symbols as like the story here. So I'm trying to be insensitive. You mentioned the swastika earlier, what it originally was and what it became when the Nazis took it. Imagine finding that symbol out in the wild and someone says, boy, I don't know what that is. Never seen that before. And you look it up on the internet. Boy, I don't know. I can't find this. This is some ancient Buddhist symbol. You're basically saying we're stupid. Like, you're dumb for not. Again, if this was real life and this is actually connected, like this is a whole universe, that spiral symbol would be synonymous. Like,
it would pop up. They'd find it, and they'd go on the computer and be like,
the Netflix documentary would have a spiral at the center and say the Rust
totally.
So,
but I think the reason that, the reason they don't go,
Peter looks for it and he's like, I can't find anything with this symbol.
Yeah. They could have done that better, but again, think about it like this. If they would have put the scene in that you're talking about, then they would have had to keep going down the Tuttle line.
Let me tell you how they don't have to do that. And this would have appeased me. This would have been this answer. Hey, Chief Danvers, I looked up that symbol. It was actually found in a bunch of occult murders back in Louisiana in the mid-90s and again in the early 2000s. Some cult people used it as a symbol, but then I continued to do my research, and it actually goes back much further to the indigenous people of Alaska. They used it in tribal times as a warning sign of whatever. You just explained away the whole reason it was connected. They just, the fact that it was there, and if you actually add that little bit of dialogue saying, oh yeah, I found it, but this isn't that what that is. This is actually goes back further. Then it plays into your point. They corrupted it. They co-opted it. They used it for their own
needs. They just didn't take one extra line of dialogue.
But the fact that they actually said he investigated it and couldn't find it is there's no.
Sure, hey, you could have tweaked that line.
They had to go to a local, and the local is the one who's like, "Oh, I know this symbol. It's a
Yeah, I mean, listen, he could have tweaked that. You could have tweaked that line, and I wouldn't have been mad about it. And you could have left out the time as a flat circle thing. I wouldn't. This show is not perfect, but I like what they did, and I'm just saying, from my side of things, it was nice to have a little homage to the, like, I don't need it all to connect. I don't need it all. I'm just different. That's how I am. I was just like, hey, this is nice.
If they left out all that stuff, would have made the series any different for you?
No, but also, it was a fun addition.
But did you enjoy the series more because that was in there, or did it
Yes.
matter?
No, I enjoyed it more. I had 100% enjoyed it more.
And that's the reason I didn't enjoy it. That's the reason.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because everybody's different. Everybody's different.
But
yeah, no, it did add to my enjoyment because I go, oh, cool. Like it's all connected in this fun little way. And I just enjoyed it. You know what I mean? But like, but not everybody can enjoy it. Okay, that's fine.
And I was the opposite. I'm like, why did you even bother? Like, why put this in there if it's not going to? Because they made it consequential to the story. The spiral played such a huge part in the story. The Tuttle United being so involved. It wasn't like they just mentioned, like, they could have been driving down the street. The laundromat was named Tuttle United, and that would have been
they could have owned the whole town, you know, whatever.
But the fact that they made it so, like, they did this huge investigation into who funded it. And when you reveal it's Tuttle United, everyone's going to assume, oh shit, this is somehow, that's the same Tuttle family. Again, I understand what you're saying. It's the red herring. I get all that. But again, it just, and
there's multiple red herrings in the show too. You know?
And it just seemed pointless to put that in there if it didn't mean anything. And again, my point being is, yes, I know you say you enjoy it more because it's in there, but it wouldn't have changed the show had it not been in there.
Totally. It was just something for the fans. And boy, does that backfire, not because it was wrong, but because fans can't love anything. They have to. And I'm not talking about you specifically, because again, you come at it from a much more like a logical standpoint. Fans just have to hate what you gave them. It's like a gut reaction now on the internet. They just have to be mad about it. And I'm like, man, that was cool, but I guess I'm alone. Like, I mean, I'm not alone. You're right. It was about 50-50. Some people liked it, but with the tiebacks, I was like, that's cool. It's just a nice nod. I'm on this other story with Danvers and Navarro. I'm not really worried about Rust and Cole, and which is actually, I think, a good quality to this show is that it makes you go, I don't worry about Rust and Cole. It's about Navarro and Danvers. And so it was just a nice little tieback, and I just enjoyed that.
I'll say this one last thing. We got to get to categories. We are going way too long in this. My girlfriend, who really enjoyed season 1, she's never gone back to rewatch it. I've rewatched the first season. I'm not kidding, at least 8 times. When I get bored
genius.
And there's nothing on, I'll put on the first season of True Detective and watch it again. I obsess. I love that show. Absolutely adore that show. She loves it. She enjoyed the series. She cracks up when I quote it. Like, she enjoys it. I have T-shirts. Like, but she's only ever watched it all the way through one time. But she loved it. And when she saw the stuff in the season, she had the same reaction as me. Now, my girlfriend's she was not obsessed. She didn't rewatch it. She didn't do her own investigation. She didn't go out and buy Robert Chambers' book called The King in Yellow because there was some connection to the Yellow King, which I, as a freaking weirdo obsessed fan, did back in 2014. I went and bought Robert Chambers' book called The King in Yellow because I thought it was going to give me some answer about Carcosa. Did it? No. Did I see the relevance of like why it was in there? It's because they mentioned Carcosa in the book, sure, but it really meant nothing in the grander scheme of the show. But I was like, man, this has got to play some part, and I was way invested. She wasn't. She enjoyed the show. She loved it, enjoyed it. It was over. She's not really thought about it since 2014. But she is a very casual observer and just a fan, had the same visceral reaction as me, which was, why bother? What, like, it didn't serve any purpose. And she wasn't, I wasn't like, when it was over, I didn't say, fuck this series, I'm done with it. I just said, I like this show. I liked everything they did with this show, but why did you even bother putting that in there if you're going to try to tease it and then just have no payoff whatsoever? It's what you say. When you try to create fan service, more oftentimes than not, it creates more problems than it solves. And that would be my only criticism. My only real criticism of this show is don't do it because you're trying to appease fans or you're trying to like give them a little bit. This is me and you agreeing here. When you do that, you're more than likely just going to piss them off even more because you don't give them what they want.
I'm very much in the camp of don't listen to fans because there's no way to please them. There just isn't. I appreciated the nod. Some fans didn't, and that's fine.
Yeah. So anyways, we got to move on. That was a really long conversation.
But I knew it would be. I knew it was coming.
We were going to get into that one because we knew going into this that I felt one way and you felt another.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get into best performance. People at this point are like, holy shit, I need a fucking drink after hearing you go back and forth.
I hope you're taking like a 5-hour road trip.
Yeah, right now. I hope you're in the middle of this and you're like, Jesus Christ, this show's going to be longer than the fucking episodes. Let's talk about best performance, and I'm going to spoil it here, Patrick, because there are only two. I mean, listen, the show was great. The casting was great. Everyone on the show was incredible. You know, I think I've mentioned on the show before, at some point we've done a show with John Hawkes, I think, and I love John Hawkes. I'm a big John Hawkes
Yeah, he's
fan.
been in other stuff.
Great character actor. But the show really came down to two people, Jodie Foster and Kaylee Reese. Kaylee Reese, who is a former boxer, a professional boxer, a championship level boxer, who then transitioned and now is into acting. She's still boxing, by the way. She's still got a boxing career, but she is now acting. Let me start there.
Yes.
You're acting opposite Jodie, and her name, by the way, I know people, just so you know out there in the world, her name is Jodie Foster. That's not really her name. Did you know that? That's not a real name?
I mean, I figured she had a stage name.
Yeah, her real name is Jodie fucking Foster. That's her name.
That's right, yes.
Jodie
fucking is my middle name.
Yeah, she is.
Danvers' middle name also fucking, by the way.
Jodie fucking Foster. She's a force of nature. 2-time Oscar winner. One of the greatest living actors in the world. And Kaylee Reese has been in like one thing. One movie. And she gets cast opposite Jodie Foster. And here's what I love about this. She holds her weight up against Jodie Foster in every scene, every interaction, every moment in this show. That, to me, was probably the most impressive feat of acting I have seen, because there are actors with awards on their IMDb pages, on their Wikipedia pages, that cower in the face of that kind of talent. And they'll openly admit it, that I could not, like, I struggled to face that I was acting opposite Jodie fucking Foster. Kaylee Reese didn't blink. She didn't wince. She didn't flinch. She was every bit Jodie Foster's equal in this show. And do you realize how freaking hard that is to do?
It's almost an impossible feat, Damon. And I'm going to echo what you're saying. Kaylee Reese is up against one of the top flight actors that will ever live. You know, Jodie Foster is one of the single best. And here's Kaylee Reese bringing, and by the way, you know as many women fighters as anyone will ever know because of your job. I've done documentaries with women fighters before. There's a stoicism. There's a way they carry themselves. Kaylee brought that to this performance. You know, the idea that she is willing to fight for what matters for her. You know, there's an edge to that I think an actor would have a hard time bringing. So she brings some of kind of her the idea that her character is a soldier, her character is a fighter, and it comes across very well. And I saw a lot of authenticity in a lot of her moments that actors work their ass off for their whole career to get. She just knew how to tap into it, and it was super impressive. I just enjoyed every second I saw her on screen. Also, the way Issa wrote this character, clearly Kaylee tapped into it and was like, I know exactly how to lock into this. I think the page and the character and the acting all came together. I mean, you can't sing her praises enough.
And of course, Jodie Foster was incredible. If she doesn't get an Emmy nomination, I quit. Like, she's at worst got to get a nomination. She is so good in this show. It's her first TV role since very, very early in her career. She's a tour de force in this show. She is classic Jodie. She is, again, because part of the attraction I had of her playing this role of being like a kind of a hardened older police chief is that, you know, she played the young ingenue FBI agent in Silence of the Lambs. And so in a way, this is like 30 years later, this is kind of like, would this be what Clarice Starling would be 30 years later? You know what I mean? Like, she's seen some shit, you know, and that's kind of what we get with Liz Danvers. Now, they're different characters, but they're law enforcement characters. So there is a correlation. And she plays her with such depth, and like, she is like, let's be honest, a big part of this show is Liz Danvers an asshole. Like
Yeah.
she doesn't have time for your bullshit. She doesn't have time to hear your excuses, your whatever. She's not in the mood. And throughout the series she continues to evolve and progress and change as a character, and Jodie Foster hits every single note perfectly. I'm not going to make a list and say, who's the number one actor. I'm not going to do this like a top 10 list. But if you were making a top 10 list and you're trying to argue with me who is the number one actor in the world, and you're going to say, oh, it's Denzel, it's this, whatever, Jodie Foster is somewhere in that argument, is my point.
Absolutely. Just an absolute powerhouse. I think what this season actually did really well, converse to what we just finished talking about, was how much it set itself apart. And the casting of somebody like Jodie Foster can do that. When you bring in just one of the best actors who will ever do it, you no longer have to live in the shadow of the character Russ Cole, or even Marty for that matter, played by the great Woody Harrelson. Now you have Rust Cole and you have Danvers. And when you say Danvers, people know exactly what you're talking about now, because she left an incredible impact as a character. And Jodie really knew how to live in that character. I knew so much about that character without her ever having to say anything. She could exchange a look with somebody and I know what they've been through. That's masterclass acting. I really like. I've known actors over the years, and some of them more fledgling than others, and the ones that are still trying to, get their ground. They're like, I don't know how to look at it. I go, watch Meryl Streep, watch Denzel Washington, watch Jodie Foster. They do something that just transports you to where that character is in their lives, and you feel it on the inside. They actually get into the interior of you through their performances. That's a Jodie Foster, and it was a massive coup, in my opinion, to get her for this season. I think it took the Dynamite script. I think it took Issa's vision for Jodie to go, yeah, I'll lend my talents to this. I'll go and spend 3 or 4 months in Iceland where they filmed this in complete darkness. And they did 55 days of night shoots, which if you know anything about night shoots, they suck. They got one of the best actors on the planet to do it. And she delivers on all levels.
It's wild when you think about it. Through 4 seasons of True Detectives, they've had 3 Oscar winners in the series. Matthew McConaughey won an Oscar, Mahershala Ali won an Oscar, and now Jodie Foster.
Colin Farrell.
Well, he was nominated. He didn't win.
Yeah, but he nominated, yeah.
Yeah, nominated. So, I mean, Jesus, like, talk about the acting power they've had in 4 seasons of this show.
Oh, wait, didn't he win for Banshees of Inisherin?
Did he win?
I think he did. I think they're all Oscar winners now.
Are they? Hold on.
Oh, God. Now we have to find out.
I gotta find out. I feel like, did he win? Why am I feeling like he didn't win?
I thought he did.
Maybe he did.
Folks, these things are important to us.
Hold on, I gotta look at it. Academy Awards, Best Actor. No, he was nominated, but he did not
nominated. Win. Okay, he didn't win.
Nominated, yeah, he was nominated. He was nominated for Banshees of Inisherin, but he did not win. Okay. Yeah, nominated. He
Either way.
He won, I believe he won, let me see if I'm right about this. He won the, he won the Golden Globe. He did win that, but he did not win the Academy Award. So
either way, you're talking about award-winning actors across the board. Jodie Foster now gets to hang her hat on True Detective, and I think in one of the best ways possible. I mean, really, this will be an unforgettable season, and it's in large part to what she brought to it.
Let's move on to our next category, our fantastic Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award. This is the award that we hand out to the most valuable player from whatever movie we're reviewing, in this case a TV show. And it could be a cast member, it could be a music supervisor, it could be a director, it could be a writer, it could be anybody that's involved with this show. And we name it after the great character actor Ken Foray for his role in From Beyond, where he decided to save the world by running down into a basement in nothing more than a thong bikini. So this is the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award. Patrick, who gets your MVP award for True Detective Night Country?
My MVP award goes to Issa Lopez, director and writer of True Detective Night Country. Damon, this is the definition of vision. She brings in her horror roots, and we admitted that this is one of the more horrific seasons of True Detective. It's just laced in that dread and that horror dread, in the angles that are chosen, in the shots that are chosen, in the atmosphere that is built. That's Issa Lopez. That's her ideas and her vision coming to screen in a really great way. That's her writing and her development of the characters. These are very lived in characters, as I said before. There's a lot of emotional storytelling, which is a really, I think when a show falls flat and feels empty, it's because it's lacking emotional weight. It's lacking that humanity. Issa Lopez knew how to tap into it here. Every single one of these characters, I don't care, the good ones, the bad ones, there was all something deep down in these people that was motivating them on an emotional level. That's what MVP is all about. It's she brought all of her powers, all the best things that she can bring to a production, and we got True Detective Night Country, arguably the next best season of True Detective since the first.
So the real answer is Issa Lopez. She is the answer. She is the MVP. She crafted the show. She came up with the show. She came up with the character. She came up with the story. This is a singular vision of an incredible artist. So really, she's the MVP. But I do want to give a nod, and this is going to be a controversial nod. A lot of people are going to be pissed off about this because of what we talked about earlier. But I'm going to give my MVP on a lower MVP level, not Issa Lopez level. Issa Lopez is the real MVP. Let me be clear about that. But my MVP I'm going to give credit to, because even though clearly he doesn't like this season and clearly he doesn't want to be associated with it, my MVP is Nick Pizzolatto for creating this show, because you don't get True Detective Night Country without True Detective Season 1. You don't get True Detective Night Country without Nick Pizzolatto. This is his brainchild. Now, did Issa Lopez make it her own show? Absolutely. Did she create her own world that had a tone similar to the first season or towards other seasons of True Detective? Absolutely. Did we get back to the heart of the two cops, which was the heart of the first season, the second or the third season? The second season kind of teetered on three people, but kind of two. It kind of centered around Rachel McAdams and Colin Farrell's character, but there was also a third one kind of slotted in there. But the idea of True Detective was two detectives kind of investigating a crime. That model was created by Nick Pizzolatto. Now, did he also set himself up for failure because he had such an incredible first season? Absolutely. Nothing he could have done after that, short of bringing back Rust and Marty, would have appeased people, because that first season was so freaking good. But I do want to give him a nod, because even if he hates this, even if he doesn't want to be associated with it, even if he's trying to condemn it, and I don't appreciate his comments, because it's not Issa Lopez's fault that she took on a job and did a great job with it, by the way. And sorry that your last couple seasons weren't as well received. That's not her fault. Or that your deal with HBO ended, not her fault. But I do appreciate that Nick Pizzolatto created this universe, because it is a very unique universe that I've not seen before. There's a lot of detective shows out there. There's a lot of murder mystery shows out there. There's a million cop procedurals out there.
Yeah.
True Detective is wholly singular and unique in the way it's done. Even if, again, I didn't like the nods to season 1, the tone was the same. The character development was similar. The murder investigation felt familiar. All that felt lived in. And I knew what to expect. I had an idea, an estimation of what was coming, because they set it with the tone. And that is largely due to what was set in the first season. So I have to give a nod, even though he seems like he was a bit of an ass about it. We don't get here without Nick Pizzolatto.
I mean, we do get here without him, because I think Issa created something that was totally different. But you know what? I can't really give him any flowers on this one, because he wasn't graceful. He didn't have to be, certainly, but the fact that he couldn't be graceful and just go, I hope everybody enjoys the season. He certainly gets a kickback being an executive producer. He gets a little bit of money on it. That he wanted to kind of tear down another artist. To me, he's persona non grata. I'm not interested in him anymore. You don't need to tear somebody else's work down to build yours up. Let your work stand for what it is and be confident in it. Be confident in what you did instead of kind of priming people to dislike this, which a lot of fans latched onto. They went, Nick Pizzolatto, he's the GOAT. So if he says it sucks, then I've decided before it starts that it sucks. And that's not you. I'm just saying that there are certain people out there that certainly, I saw some real shit posters that are like on his dong for no good reason, because he has no skin in their game. But I thought it was shitty that he couldn't be graceful about it. He doesn't have to say he loves the new season. He doesn't have to promote it. But to kind of shoot it down before it starts, I think is a crappy thing to do.
My only slight, and I do mean slight, defense, and again, it was shitty to go after Issa. It was shitty to make a comment so backhandedly about Issa Lopez and your uninvolvement in the show. My only defense, and it's a very slight defense, is that television and movies are a very nasty business, and creators are often shat on by the executives in the studios. When Hawkeye came out for Disney Plus, Marvel show starring Jeremy Renner and Haley Steinfeld, that show, really enjoyed that season. It was largely based upon a original comic book that introduced Kate Bishop into the Hawkeye mythology, and it was largely based around, I believe, God, why am I not forgetting? Matt's, what's his name? I can't remember his name.
Fraction?
Matt Fraction, I think it was. They like barely mentioned it at the bottom of like the last screen of like, you know, partially written, whatever. Like he got like a tiny mention in the credits. And comic book writers, if you read, like this happened with Captain America Civil War, the original writer of that, who did the actual Civil War comic book, they mentioned him. He didn't get kickbacks. He didn't get any money from it. Like they basically said, you gave us everything to write. We're taking your idea and making a movie out of it. You don't get shit. And so the comic book community is like, what the fuck? Like these guys made these stories and you're barely giving them credit, much less involving them and giving them money for a story they crafted. My only defense here is whether you like him or not and whether his comment was shitty or not, and it was, I get the feeling, and again, here's my interpretation, Patrick.
Yeah, fair enough.
My interpretation is it was taken away from him because it was his baby. He did season one, he was the main, yes, he wrote all of season one, all of it was all him. Yes, season 2 and 3 involved other writers, but he was the driving force behind it. His deal with HBO ended, and it seemed like the show was dead. Like they were just going to be done with it. Nick Pizzolatto's gone. He signed a deal with FX, and he's just moving on. And then they revive it, and they don't tell him about it. And I think that's one of the comments he made. They didn't contact me about it. They didn't ask for my opinion. They didn't even tell me it was happening. As a creator and as a writer, it would probably piss me off a little bit if I made something, if I created, if I created The Sopranos, I'm David Chase, and HBO puts out a trailer saying The Sopranos 2024, AJ is now the boss. And David Chase is like, what the fuck? I didn't sign off on this. Like, you didn't tell me this was happening. What the fuck is this?
Yeah.
I can understand him being a little irritated. So, do I agree with what he said? Do I agree with the shitty attitude? Do I certainly agree with the way he kind of made it seem like Issa Lopez's version was not good? I didn't like any of that. But my one slight justification is, as a creator, when you have something taken away from you, and I understand that's the way of the world, that's how studios work, but
it sucks.
It sucks, and that's all I'm saying. Like, they didn't consult him. They didn't tell him it was happening. They didn't like, hey, man, we're thinking about making another True Detective. Like, would you like to be involved? Or, hey, we're doing this. Like, just so you know, like, fuck off. We don't want anything to do with you, but we're doing it. That's not the way the world works. So I understand to a certain extent as the sole, because it wasn't like he was hired by HBO to write True Detective. He wrote True
he
Detective,
came up with it, and they bought it from him.
And they bought it. And then it got taken away. And so even though, I don't agree with how he did it, I do understand a little bit of the friction being like, hey, this is my thing. You took it from me. And you're not even telling me it's like, you're not even telling me it's moving on. Like, you're basically saying, hey, we made a new version of your show and fuck off. That's my only justification of it.
And the only counter I have to that is, so attack HBO. Don't attack the series that people, like get specific if you want to be specific. Get specific and attack HBO. Instead, he kind of tried to set up his following to say, we're not going to like this version of the show. That's kind of what he was playing around with words there to kind of just say, this ain't what I approve of. And so I think it's shitty. I think because it only tarnishes Issa and Jody and Kaylee and all the people who worked on the show when what he's mad at is HBO. So be mad at HBO. But don't trash the people who created the show. They had nothing to do with that. And if he was in the same situation and they were like, "Hey, you want to take over the new season of Game of Thrones? Here's a mountain of money." You bet your fucking ass he takes it. I mean, I'm just giving an example. But my point was, I didn't like that he attacked them. But if he attacked HBO and didn't try to cock block the show, then I would have been like, yeah, I get it. It does suck that studios steal shit from writers. They do it all the fucking time. That's the reason the writers go on strike, because they're the ones that get paid last. Like he's got legit grievances, but his grievances aren't with Issa Lopez and Jodie Foster. His grievances are with HBO.
He's not. And I agree. The way he went about it was wrong. And his comments saying, don't blame me, I had nothing to do with the show, because he basically set the tone that he didn't like it by saying that. But again, as a creator and as seeing a million comic book creators who just get screwed over constantly and they don't even get, like, if you went, and again, it's not their fault, but if you walk up to Chris Evans and say, man, did you like the original story that Captain America written by Matt Fraction or whoever wrote it, or Ed Brubaker, which was a big part of Winter Soldier? He'd be like, who the fuck's Ed Brubaker? Like, if you're Ed Brubaker and you created the Winter Soldier, which he actually did, I'd be a little pissed off. Like, hold on now. Sure. So I don't like the way he went about it. I really don't. But as a creator, I can understand the irritation that you created this, that your baby was taken away from you, and they didn't even bother to tell you this was happening. They're just like, oh yeah, here's True Detective. Like, they announce it as Night Country, and he's like, the fuck? Like, yeah. So again, I don't agree with the way he went about it, but as a creator, as a writer, I understand being that irritated.
I get it. It's just his ire was with HBO, and for some reason he attacked the show instead. His problem isn't the show. His problem is with HBO.
But I understand the irritation is what I'm getting at. And also, as I said, my MVP, the reason I give him that is because we don't get here without, like, I understand, like, Issa Lopez had a vision for an idea of a show. Would that have ever come to fruition? Would it ever have gotten on HBO? Would it have ever become anything? I don't know. I can't say that for sure. Is Issa Lopez incredibly talented? Absolutely. But do I know for sure that her vision would have involved Jodie Foster and Kaylee Reese and had all the resources? No. The reason it happened is because True Detective. They wanted a True Detective story. That's what she crafted it into. And it doesn't happen without Nick Pizzolatto creating the series. So I got to give him his flowers for coming up with the original idea, because without that, we don't know that we would have ever seen this story.
Sure.
It's true.
He's a dick.
I disagree, but
he's a total dick. I mean, I'm not saying he's not talented, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have a right to be angry. I'm saying he's a dick. That's what I'm saying.
He's entitled to.
He's entitled to be angry, and I acknowledge that. He did it in a dickish way.
He did, but he's entitled to be a dick because it's his thing. He had it, like I said. If you're, I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of like a really bad cover song. Like if you're the original.
Nah, Damon, I understand all of the grievances he has. Yeah. He was just a dick about it. It's not that I don't understand. He was a dick about it. That's the problem. That's the only problem I have with it. Again, it's not that I have a problem with him having a problem. He was a dick about it.
And as a creator, maybe he has a right to be a dick about
it. I guess.
Let's talk about best episodes. 6 episodes. We got 6 of them to go through. Patrick, what was your favorite episode in True Detective Night Country?
Mine was the finale, and the reason is because of what we discover, what we turn over. I think if you don't stick your landing, then the show can kind of fall apart. Lost, big problem there, right? But a show like Breaking Bad, it stuck its landing, and people praise it. I think Sopranos ending stuck its landing. I loved how Sopranos ended. I think this ended well. I loved how the original season of True Detective ended, where it was like Nope, this is some real shit that really happened, and here's how it went down. This finale tied things up into, in my opinion, a very clean way, and it served some justice for some people that deserved that justice. And mind you, they're out in this wild country, this night country, and so you get some country justice, right? And you and I love like revenge movies and shit like that. So to see that it was like a bunch of women who were like, we're sick and tired of seeing our women disappear and nothing happening. We're going to do something about it. I loved that was the end. And so for me, as much as I liked all the other episodes, the fact that it was that in the end, that it was just like, we're going to serve our own type of justice because justice never gets served for us. Loved how that ended.
So I like the finale a lot, but I can't pick it as my favorite because of my issue with the whole tie together. It didn't need to be there. So again, not to rehash our other conversation.
Oh no,
that's what. As much as I like the finale and I like the ending, I'm sitting there saying everything I like. The one thing I didn't like, that the fact that it didn't have any meaning to it in whatsoever just bugged me, and so that kind of took away something for me from the finale. So my favorite episode goes on the complete opposite end, which is the debut episode.
Yeah.
Because much like the first season of True Detective, and this is where I talk about this season pays homage to the first season just by the tone and the way the setup was made that didn't need all the other crap. From the opening scene to those scientists, the creepy scene in there where they're in the station, the lights flicker, it goes out, they're disappeared. And then the very end when we see the corpsicle and oh my God, what is this? The introduction of Danvers, the introduction of Navarro, all these characters, this world of living at the edge of the world in Alaska, in this little one-horse town with 250 people or whatever the number is. That whole setup was brilliant. And again, just being honest, when the first episode of the first season of True Detective ended, I was like, I am so fucking in. I am so in. Had the same feeling here. When that episode ended, I was like, oh man, we are on. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't have that same feeling in season 2. I don't even remember if I really had. I liked season 3, but I don't remember even if I had that feeling at the end of the first episode of season 3.
Yeah.
Season 4, Night Country, when that first episode ended, I was like, I cannot wait to watch episode 2. And that to me is the sign of a great episode, because if you don't hook people into the beginning, weirdly, like you talk about finales, like I would argue Breaking Bad, which is one of the greatest TV series of all time, did not have a great opening. That first season, it loses a lot.
It had a great pilot, but the whole season was not interesting. You're right.
I heard a lot of people being like, yeah, I kind of wanted to tune out. It's like, dude, trust me, stick around. It gets so much crazier.
Yeah, you had to wait a while.
But yeah, but even the pilot, it was a good pilot, but it wasn't like when it was.
I think it's a very good pilot. Yeah.
Even in that moment, I was like, oh my God, this is like, and I was a late arriver to Breaking Bad, so I didn't
same.
when it first said. Game of Thrones is a great example where the first episode was just like holy shit moment after holy shit moment. It was such a great setup. Now they blew it at the end. The ending of Game of Thrones was terrible, but the first episode hooked you in immediately. So I appreciate a great Lost is a great example of that. I agree with you. The ending was weird and didn't tie everything together, and they just made it up as they went along. They've admitted that. But the first episode, that first 2-hour episode, holy shit, if you were not hooked, you don't have a pulse. Because that first 2 episodes of Lost, you're like, I'm in.
Another great pilot. Yeah. And True Detective, season 4, Night Country, hell of a pilot. I mean, you're right. Just totally locked in. Like, I can't wait to see what happens next. I really can't. And the follow-up episode was fucking great too. I mean, they just knew how to kind of keep pulling you back in. You couldn't get out of this thing. Very good and very reminiscent of the first season in that respect, where you're just so invested.
And I want to throw out that you mentioned earlier, a lot of people said the middle episodes kind of dragged. I completely disagree. I was in from beginning to end. There was not a bad episode in the bunch, in my opinion. Like I said, my only problem was, again, and even though we argued about it for like an hour, honestly, it wasn't even, it was an annoyance. It wasn't like I hated it. It just annoyed me. Like, don't put it in there, but it didn't ruin the show for me. And the show is enthralling for me. And I didn't think the middle episodes dragged at all. I was way invested. So yeah, don't get me. Also, let me also give credit. I loved the intro by the Handsome family in the original True Detective. The
Mm-hmm.
that song, loved it. But the Billie Eilish song in True Detective Night Country, I'm a big Billie Eilish fan. I was like,
I
fuck
like
yeah,
Billie Eilish.
give me some Billie Eilish. That was great. I loved the little tweak and using that as the intro song.
And there were people complaining about that shit, and I was like, God damn, do people just like to complain? like it's a cool fucking song. Yeah, I mean, what the fuck?
That is 100% people complaining just to complain because
Yeah,
Billie Eilish is fucking cool and that song is awesome. So
yeah, come on.
I was way into that. Let's talk about best scare because this show, as we said at the very beginning, forever ago, as people are like,
3 days ago,
you guys are 3 days ago when we stopped arguing about whether this was annoying that season 1 and season 4 weren't connected. Best scare. This is a horror show. There were legitimate scares in Night Country, which was a little surprising because I didn't know that it was going to be that way. What was your best scare in True Detective Night Country?
a lot of scares, Damon, but none quite like, and I'm sure this got everybody. When they found out that one of their corpuscles was still alive. Holy shit. So the guys are trying to navigate the crime scene, and again, all these frozen corpses in place. They snap one of the corpses, what they think is a corpse's arm, and all of a sudden, the corpse starts screaming. And I'm sitting next to my wife, and she goes, "What the fuck?" And not in a very like, why is this happening? Why am I witnessing this right now? This awful, terrible thing that you watch this half frozen corpse starting to scream. And I think that was the cold open of the episode. And it was just like, Jesus Christ, that was fucking intense.
Yeah, I did not see that one coming at all. Like, that was
No.
that I was just like, well, you got me there because I didn't think any of these guys were alive. Yeah, that one definitely got me. That was a good one. My best scare came in, I want to say it was episode 5, when Liz and Navarro are down in the dredge, or maybe it was episode 4. They're in the dredge, which is an abandoned ship that has kind of almost become like a hangout in this area, and they're investigating because they believe that Clark, the scientist, is hiding there. And so they're looking through there, and Navarro starts getting visions of like her sister, and there's something tying this. And then she turns around at one moment, her sister's there screaming in her face. I was like, oh shit. It just got me. I was like, God damn.
There's so many of those great classic kind of like horror jump scares. Like it's littered all over this show, and because it deals with ghosts, and my wife was jumping multiple times, even in that final episode when they're in the cave and she turns around and there's Clark. She was like, what the fuck? Like, the show will get you, man, because it's, again, Issa Lopez comes from horror roots, and it's all over this show. Really, in the execution of the scares is a very obvious place to see it.
Yeah, but that one was a good jump scare because I think, if I remember correctly,
yeah, it was a good one.
She saw her sister floating in the water and like realized what it was. Then she turned around and she's right there. I was like, oh Jesus!
Oh yeah, and she's all, it's kind of zombied out or ghosted out. It was creepy.
Yeah, very creepy. All right, let's move on to our next category, which is, can we survive the Night Country? This is where you and I inject ourselves into whatever we're watching, in this case, True Detective. So apparently you and I are living in Ennis, Alaska. Patrick, I'm going to answer for you. Let me just see if I'm right about this. You're not making it out because it's fucking cold and you're from San Diego. You are not making it out of this thing.
Damon, you couldn't be more wrong. Truth be told, I absolutely love the cold. I actually was in Iceland, and I went to where they filmed True Detective. It was almost a year. It was like almost like 9 months before the show came out. I love the cold. I love icy cold winter. Now, that doesn't mean I want to shovel driveways. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me twisted. But I love the cold. That's what I think you've heard me complain off the air many times. When it's like, I don't know, starting about May in this room where I do the podcast, it becomes insufferably hot for me. I hate the heat. I genuinely hate it. I love the idea of the Night Country, Damon. And I do think, and I think about the cast of characters, all the side characters. You and I, if our lives were just slightly different, we probably would have ended up in a place like Ennis. Like, we'd certainly be on that bill. Like, yeah, I live out in the fucking encampment way out where there's no electricity. Like, I was close enough. But ultimately, Damon, would I survive? My opinion is yes, I would. because I'm not a shithead. I'm not going to go out there and mess with indigenous peoples or disrespect people or do anything like that. So I'm not getting my nose dirty, so I don't end up incurring the wrath of karma.
So I'm gonna say, the cold isn't. I live in Ohio, so I'm used to the cold. That doesn't bother me. I was joking because you live in California, and most California people, when it's like 50 degrees, they're putting on winter coats, and I'm like, that's like summer around here, man.
Oh, I love 50.
um, so the cold wouldn't bother me. I don't like cold, but I've lived in it my entire life, so it doesn't bother me. And weirdly, I'm very much a city boy. Like I like the convenience of living in a city. Like I grew up in a one-horse town, and when I moved to a city for the first time when I was like a teenager, I was like, my life has forever changed because now I have the convenience of a big town. Everything is here. Like everything I need is a within a 20-minute car ride. Every food I could want, every clothes I want to buy, every clothing I want to buy, every activity I want to do, movies, concerts, it's all there. So I'm a city boy. So by definition, you would think I could never hack it in a isolated ass town in the middle of nowhere. That being said, if you ever listen to this podcast on any level, you know one of my favorite brands of horror is isolation horror. One stop, like one room horror. I love isolation horror. There's part of me deep down inside that thinks I would love living in a town like Ennis, Alaska, where I am just cut off from the rest of the world. No one can mess with me. None of that, like none of the outside shit matters. You are just part of this town and the rest of the world is cut off. There's something kind of poetic about that, even though I fully admit I'm a city boy. The only thing that would put me in trouble here, I think I'd be like you. I definitely wouldn't be a shithead. My only issue would be I probably would be one of the activists basically telling the mind to go fuck itself, and that could backfire on me. Yeah. But there's a world, when I was a kid, everyone in my family was involved in law enforcement in some way, shape, or form. My brother was in the Army. My other brother was worked at a prison. My dad worked at a prison. Like lots of law enforcement history in my family. Lots of military history. I was the first one not to do any military service. Everyone tried to get me to sign up for the military. I had no interest. But I did when I first went to college, and I was involved in English literature and psychology. I had a class with a criminal psychologist who was a professor who also did criminal psychology for the police and for prisons. And I was really into it. And he's like, you would be great at this. Like, if you actually studied and became a criminal psychologist, like, you could work for the police. You would be a great criminal psychologist to help people solve crimes because, like, that's a big part of it, right? Like, what do you call them? Profilers, things like that. He's like, you'd be really good at this. And I was way interested in it, but I was more into writing. So I pursued psychology for several quarters, but ended up just focusing on English. There's part of me that feels like I would have been in part of the investigation because I feel like in another world, I could have been like a criminal psychologist or a cop or a detective. So yeah, I think I'd survive and maybe even help solve the crime.
I would hope so. Damon. And at best, you could at least just fucking pound the fucker right into the snow who did the crime. Yeah, just one hammer over the head and spike him right into the ground.
And I guarantee you, Peter Pryor, I'd find out where that fucking spiral symbol came from quicker than you did, buddy.
Hey, he was a greenhorn. We know that. He was still learning.
Just saying, I would have found that search.
Some guys don't have that gear.
Yeah. I would have found that Wikipedia page real quick. Last category is always, Patrick, is it scary? We've already kind of answered this question, but we'll answer it right here again. True Detective Night Country, is it scary?
Hell yes. As scary or even at times scarier than the original. I mean, truly some horror elements in this one. We wouldn't have done a supersized podcast if this wasn't a horror show. We got a horror show, Damon. And that just tickles me pink. And I truly do love this season of True Detective Night Country. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was scary. It had such a tinge of the supernatural, even more so than the first season. as much as I think the first season was absolutely an occult horror thriller show, this one was very much a horror show. Like there was no,
Yeah.
you could debate with someone, was the first season a horror show? I think again, I'm more about inclusion. Like I think a lot of serial killer stories are horror because it's a serial killer, for God's sake, you're killing people.
Totally.
But if you're going to argue with me, you could argue with me a little bit more about the first season. You can't argue with me here. This is a horror show in season 4 of Night Country. So yes, it's absolutely a horror show. It's absolutely scary. There's actual jump scares that got me. I was like, holy shit, this doesn't happen. It actually got me a couple times. So yeah, this is scary. And listen, there's like an hour-long argument in the middle of this podcast where you and I were bitching back and forth at each other about whether or not this should have tied back to season 1 in any way, shape, or form. And we also argued about whether Nick Pizzolatto should have been a dick. But I want to end on this, Patrick. For all that conversation, my one big hang-up, and even though I do back Nick Pizzolatto a little bit for why he's so pissed off, through all that, I want to commend Issa Lopez on an incredible show. I want to commend True Detective Night Country on being an incredible series. I loved it. It was really enjoyable. It was 6 episodes. I loved every episode. Did I have one beef? Sure. Did it ruin the show for me? Absolutely not. Did the ending leave some ambiguity? Yes. Did I hate it? No. I enjoyed it. So I want to be clear about that. Like, I know we had a big argument in the middle of this show about one thing I didn't like, but I want to be clear. That one thing didn't ruin the show, didn't make me dislike the show, and I certainly didn't go on Twitter and say, fuck this show because of that one thing. I liked the show. I really enjoyed the show. And when it was all done, I was happy I watched it.
And Damon, what people don't know is that these days I don't actually have a ton of time for TV because it takes so long to kind of get the story done. I have time to basically watch a movie for this podcast and then maybe watch an additional one because it's coming out that week or something like that. So I don't give a lot of my time to TV anymore. I was so happy to give my time to this. I honestly, I wish it was 10 episodes, not because it was missing anything or anything like that. I just fucking enjoyed it. And I wanted more of it. Like I want season 2 of Night Country. How can we get Danvers and Navarro back on the scene? Like I like this show. And so, yeah, I mean, just simply put, it got me back into TV, at least for a little bit. Am I going to go watch a bunch of other things? Probably not. But it got me back into TV, and that's hard to do these days for a guy like me.
Yeah, I'll be honest, when I got the screeners from HBO and it got to episode 6 and it was like the final, I was like, no. I was like, there's 8 episodes in season 1. There should be 2 more. What the fuck? Only 6? So, yeah, I was like, I want more of this show. Give me more of this show. So I was like bummed out when it was only 6. So, yeah, wait for it. And again, Issa Lopez had my support from Tigers Are Not Afraid. She continues to have my support. I want to see whatever she does next, and whether it's HBO, True Detective, whatever else comes, sign me up for more of that. So that is our show. True Detective Night Country, all episodes are currently available on Max or watch it on HBO. They're replaying it constantly right now, so it's probably not hard for you to find it. Want to say a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes into the show. We appreciate it. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and you can also find us over on our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead, and you can literally see me and Patrick arguing with each other over this episode. You got questions, comments. We actually got a request today through email of a movie that somebody wants us to review. Send us an email, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or hit us up on social media. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter, X, Facebook, or Instagram. Find us over there. Send us a DM. We'd love to hear from you guys. We do try to respond to everybody. So please hit us up. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes in each and every week to the show. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in.